Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 1. I was 4 when I discovered that not all men were created equal. Many are born with quirks, superhuman abilities and characteristics, mutations and adaptations. They've come to dominate society in a way not seen since the earliest discoveries: fire, bronze, chariots. While 80% of the world is born with a quirk, there are those who aren't born with such gifts. I am one of them, that 20%, only 3% in Japan, without a quirk. I was born quirkless, destined for an unfulfilled life, for I wanted more than anything to be a hero. In the early years of our quirk society, many with quirks used their abilities to commit crime, and some went beyond simple crime to become true villains, interested in destroying, remaking, and controlling society. As such, heroes arose to fight them and to save people. And the greatest of all heroes lives today, All Might. Nobody knows much about who he is and what his quirk is, but when he first appeared some 10 years ago, saving people with a laugh and a smile, everyone knew he would become the greatest. They call him the symbol of peace. It was when I was 10 that I got my opportunity to begin my own journey and become a hero. Now this is something new, but the government has mandated that everyone 10 years of age is to take the Heroic Reasoning and Logistics Test, or HRLT for short, the teacher said, her voice tired and monotone. Many pro-heroes, including All Might, were involved with designing this test, so do take it seriously. The purpose of this test is to sort through and organize those considering become heroes and potentially be given an easier route into various heroic high schools, including UA High. Although Izuku Midoriya had been closely paying attention to his teacher's statement, he straightened in his seat hearing the words, UA High. He glanced around and saw that nearly everyone else had straightened up too, excited. Naturally, that included Katsuki Bakugo. Of course Kachan would be interested. He has such a versatile and powerful quirk in explosions, and he has the confidence to be a great pro-hero. You will be given only 1 hour to complete the test. Anyone who doesn't within the time limit would be best served giving up their dream of becoming a hero. There was some grumbling, but they were all focused on the test. Izuku watched as thick packets were handed out, stacks shrinking as they moved backwards. He passed on all but one test when a stack came to him and his eyes immediately went to the name. It really is a Heroic Reasoning and Logistics Test. I should do well, memorizing all 5 of my journals for my future. Hopefully nothing requires us to approach a scenario using our own quirk. And you can begin, now. Papers shuffled as they all turned over the first page. Izuku read the first question and grinned. 1. A 5-story building contains 2 villains, both with shapeshifting quirks. They have taken 27 civilians hostage. 3 heroes have responded. One has a pyrokinetic quirk, the second with a chameleon quirk, and the third with a speed quirk. How do they take down the villains while minimizing property destruction and injuries? When the hour ended, Izuku struggled to suppress his grin. Not only had he finished the test, and judging from the groans many didn't, but he also felt proud of his answers. Especially on that final question about whether heroes suddenly move to save people. I mean, why wouldn't they? All Might said that it was possible. A lanky man with long blonde hair walked into the office of UA High's principal early on a Saturday morning. He grumbled as the large white rodent in suit and tie poured 2 cups of tea, steam floating from the ceramic cups. He slid one across his desk as the lanky man sat down to face him. Why have you summoned me on such secretive terms, Nedzu? The lanky man asked. He took a cup and sipped, smiling with the warmth. The only hero I know that operates in such a manner is Eraserhead, though he was like that as a student. Nedzu smiled at the recollection of the newest instructor. We just received the final results of the Heroic Reasoning and Logistics Test, he said. I know you were uncertain about the test, what with the current government originally designing it for the sole purpose of selecting a successor for you and one for all. I am aware of the purpose of the HRLT. I was the one who suggested it could be used to help build the next generation of heroes. Plus, we both know how important it is that if something happens to me that there'll be someone to take up my mantle as the symbol of peace, but Theet is still years away. Naturally, Toshinori. Nedzu set down his tea and scooted forward. After your fight with All for 1-2 years ago, both we at UA High in the government believe it best to begin preparing your successor. With your predecessor's death at all for one's hands, it is of the greatest importance that your quirk is protected from the villains that remain. She did last for several more years after initially passing one for all onto you, so we believe you will last until your successor receives their provisional license, should the worst happen. You must have a name then. Who is it? Toshinori asked. Nedzu nodded and slid a portfolio across the table. Toshinori flipped the cover and stared at the photo of a nervous boy with green hair and freckles. Frowning, he glanced up at the principal, who had stood from his chair to walk around the table. His name is Izuku Midoriya. Among the 13% of testers that finished within the given hour, he achieved a feat that the test design team thought impossible. His answers matched yours nearly word for word. While some of the 300,000 children who took the test wrote answers similar to yours and there were some who reflected other heroes, his lived up to the school motto. There were a few that were close, but Midoriya not only had a unique insight into the ways in which quirks work and how they can be applied to a variety of situations, but he identified your connection to the final question. Nedzu paused and smiled, head leaned back and eyes close. It is quite clear he is thoroughly aware of the operations of most pro-heroes, even Aizawa, who is quite secretive as you said. That likely played a role into his insight, especially since he is quirkless. Toshinori's eyes went wide and he reopened the Midoriya file. He scanned through the basic government report until his eyes rested on quirk, not applicable. I never did consider a quirkless successor. Nana truly believed in me, just as I should believe in whomever I pass one for all to. I know you well enough, Toshinori, to know what you're thinking. I believe this boy would be a perfect successor. There are a few years before he'll be an eligible candidate for UA, but I know you can train and prepare him not only for this institution, but to control one for all by the time he arrives. It would be concerning if he were to arrive and suffer from self-inflicted injuries. As always, Toshinori could feel the power of one for all simmering just beneath his skin, waiting for him to draw upon it. He allowed it to fill his lanky frame and he popped into the large, muscular form the public knew best. He's perfect. Nana would approve of him, although I think I will give him a test of my own. It's one thing to be creative and match my own way of thinking on heroics. However, one for all is a demanding quirk and he will be more powerful than me once he comes into his own. A test that will push his endurance, determination, and build strength will be perfect. Nedzu's head tilted. Oh, how do you plan to test him? As you know, I have many ideas on testing and maybe if you ask kindly I will tell you all about them. You know Seaside Park. I will give him exactly 10 months to clear a section of the beach. Were he preparing for UA, I would have him clear the entire beach. If he does it, I know he will be ready to accept one for all, hopefully with little oversight by our favorite healer. If not, then he will have to wait until his 13th birthday to receive it, assuming he continues to build up his personal strength. Ah, Nedzu said, understanding. Not only will you make sure he will be ready to accept one for all and the stress it will put on his body, but you'll confirm his drive and will to surpass expectations placed upon him. He will need to do so if he is to become the symbol of peace, as we're hoping. I'm impressed, Toshinori, he grinned. I approve. Once young Midoriya has finished your trial, I will talk with a few pro-heroes to aid you in teaching him to control one for all. Toshinori opened his mouth to interject, but Nedzu continued on. Reading his test and his records gives me no reason to doubt he will succeed. You will have to speak with Recovery Girl once that time comes. It is likely during those first few months he will injure himself and we don't need the press or any villain hoping to make a name discover your successor. Much is at stake here. I will go and speak with Midoriya and his family. He scooped up the file. Now it is time for an exit. Why? Because I am done here. With that, Toshinori stood and released his muscular form with a plume of smoke. No blood this time. That's a good sign. Izuku ignored the fact nobody spoke to him as his class waited for their test results. Their teacher had told them, in her tired manner, that their test results had been sent to their school and would be distributed to them the day after. Something about the results had required them to sit on them for a full day instead of being released immediately. Today is the day. If I did well enough, I might just be able to get into UA, even if I don't have a quirk. The door flew open and their teacher marched in, shoulders back and head high. She strutted to the front of the class and set down a stack smaller than the HRLT's. 300,000 students, all age 10, took this test last month, she began, fingers tapping the papers. While many wrote answers that matched the various pro heroes in the limelight, only one was able to match the answers provided by All Might. You saying one of us matched All Might? A girl with floating hair asked. She had been one of 7 to finish the test, although she had been frowning afterwards. I am. Her eyes scanned the class once more before falling upon Izuku. Even I was surprised when Izuku Midoriya's name was attached to that test. The class turned to him, full of angry whispers and curious looks. He shrunk back, wishing he could slide under his desk and disappear. A smoking hand slammed his desk, leaving a blackened outline. How did you do it, Deku? Katsuki's questioning wasn't the bellow the green-haired kid expected, but a low tone that seemed more threatening than burns and bruises. His red eyes pulsed with anger and the smoke from his hand grew thick and dark. Did you cheat? What would a quirkless Deku like you know about quirks and being a hero? I don't know. He squeaked out. I can't imagine what Kachan would think about my journals. IJ just wrote Wa and I thought Wa was right. How CC could I know all M mites would be the same? Katsuki continued to stare down at Izuku for a few more moments before grinning. Don't let your little success go to your head, Deku. Unless you suddenly develop a quirk, your surprise test result will just be just that. A surprise. When I'm a hero, I may just allow you to manage my career. The teacher sighed. Please sit, Bakugo. I'll hand out your results and you can look them over. They all include the hero your answers matched best. She paced around the class, handing paper after paper to their recipient. When she reached Izuku, she leaned near to him and said, Be proud of your accomplishment, Midoriya. I was told that the only other person as close to All Might as yours is Shoto Todoroki, the son of the number 2 hero, Endeavor. Be proud that you surpassed children with amazing quirks and high expectations to be heroes. If anyone has the capacity to be a quirkless hero, I would bet on you. Izuku walked home in a daze. The fact he had best matched All Might on the HRLT compared to every other kid in Japan, who else could have taken that test when only 300,000 did, had made him feel great, but the scorn it had brought from his classmates made him doubt anything would ever change for him. He had hoped Kachan would react with something other than anger and the arrogance that had ruined their childhood friendship, but he was even more surprised that not even a couple people would congratulate him on his accomplishment. At least I get to tell Mom myself. Maybe she'll make my favorite tonight. When he reached the apartments where he lived, he frowned at the fancy black cars out front. A man with long black hair and a long, gray scarf watched him approach, leaning against the nearest car. You're Midoriya Izuku. The man's raspy voice surprised Izuku, who could only stare in shock that the man knew his name. Is he a pro hero? He doesn't look like he works for the government directly. The man shifted and Izuku's eyes spotted the golden goggles with bars over the eye sockets beneath the scarf. And you're Eraserhead, the erasure hero. Is this about the test? Eraserhead nodded. Yes it is. Principal Nedzu of UA. Hi and All Might are waiting for you with your mother. I suggest you head on up. The boy nodded, still shocked a pro hero knew his name, and started up the staircase. As he reached the second landing, Eraserhead's parting words struck him. All Might is in my apartment. He's with the principal of UA. And they're speaking with my. He broke into a run, rushing up the concrete stairs as if they were melting his shoes. When he reached the door, he paused, took in a deep breath, and entered the apartment. His mother shuffled between the kitchen and their small dining room, carrying a tray of steaming mugs. She set them down and smiled. Welcome home, Izuku. I was quite surprised when these two gentlemen showed up this afternoon. Apparently there was a test last month that you took at school and they wanted to speak with you about your results. She leaned close and whispered, There's a pro hero in there. I think it could be All Might, but he looks a little different than usual. Izuku frowned as he followed his mother, tray in hand, into the small dining room. One of them was an animal dressed in fine clothes, the scar over his left eye standing out against his white fur. The other was tall and lanky, his blonde hair hanging long over his shoulders and his clothes a size or two larger than it should be. Two bangs hung over his face and his mother's words made sense, for the lanky man could only be All Might. If we may introduce ourselves, I am Nedzu, principal of UA. Hi, the white rodent said. My friend here is Toshinori Yagi, a pro hero. I never would have guessed that All Might has a form different compared to his heroic persona, Izuku blurted out. Nedzu smiled while Toshinori flushed. I'm sorry if that was too forward. Yes, I am All Might, Toshinori said. In a blink, his body expanded into the familiar muscular form of the symbol of peace. We have come to speak with you, young Midoriya. Tell me, what do you wish for more than anything? I want to be a hero, Izuku said, eyes blazing. A moment passed and his passion faltered like a stalling engine. Everyone says that someone without a quirk cannot become a hero. Even the HRLT implied that a hero needs a quirk. They're technically correct, Nedzu said. It is more difficult for those who do not have a quirk to deal with the strain of training and the powers of villains. However, we have a solution for you. There was an underlying purpose to the test you took, one that few know about. All Might stepped forward, knelt before Izuku, and with a smile said, how would you like to become my successor? To become a hero. Chapter 2. Izuku stared at All Might. He blinked, once, twice, and then frowned. I don't understand. How would I become your successor? I don't have a quirk. Everyone says that you need a quirk to be a hero. I mean, it's not like I can suddenly inherit or be given your quirk. All Might grinned. You should not be surprised, young Midoriya. My quirk was passed down to me by my mentor and to her by another going back to the earliest days of our quirked society. This is a surprise, yes. Izuku nodded, his mind slugging behind to catch up with what he was being told. I had no quirk when I received one for all. You mean you really were quirkless? That you're telling the truth? Inko Midoriya asked, setting the tray of cooling tea mugs aside. Izuku's mother was a short, plump woman whose dark green hair her son had inherited. All Might was born as quirkless as my son. That is correct, Mrs. Midoriya, Nedzu said as Toshinori released his heroic form. The white rodent walked to the tray of mugs and took one. He sipped and nodded. Toshinori Yagi, best known as the pro-hero All Might, was born quirkless. He is also the 8th inheritor of a unique quirk we call One for All. We suspect, especially from Mr. Yagi's stories about his mentor, the previous inheritor, that your son will be more powerful than All Might once fully trained. He continued to drink the tea, smiling. How? Izuku blurted, injecting himself back into the conversation. I've read through hundreds of threads online, all speculating as to what your quirk specifically is, but nobody knows. He turned from the others and mumbled, I would guess from what you said that you're some type of transference as part of the quirk. The other part, I'm not sure. If you're more powerful than the 7th person to have One for All, then there must be a compounding component, likely transferring energy from person to person and growing stronger with each generation, which would mean that no matter who has it, the next inheritor of One for All will be more powerful. As Izuku descended into a mumbling puzzle, Toshinori stood and turned to Inko. I understand why your son did so well on the test. With a brain like that, he'll be twice the hero I am. What? Both Midoriyas shouted. Toshinori grinned and expanded into his heroic form. He was certain Inko was shocked by how brazen and honest he was, while Izuku would be stunned by the fact the All Might was praising him. Perhaps young Midoriya even now doubts himself. Being quirkless today is much more difficult, especially for a boy growing up in our world of heroes. Although, I must confess that there is a trait integral to being a hero that even the test you took struggles to define and spot, whether you have the heroic spirit. That spirit is the one that drives people to run into burning buildings, to leap in front of traffic to save a life. Every person with the heroic spirit that makes for a true hero always says the same thing, I moved without thinking. You likely remember that phrase from the test. I asked for it to be included, to see how others would react to this sentiment. Izuku's fists tightened. Even with my success on the test, you worry that I don't have the spirit you want to see in your successor, isn't it? He threw his shoulders back and focused on Toshinori's eyes, tears threatening to spill over his own. I know I can be a great hero. One day we won't have you as our symbol of peace. Let me take up your mantle. Train me, please. He bowed, low and parallel to the ground. His body shook as he waited for a response from Toshinori. No, he remembered, from All Might. Which we already know, Nedzu interjected. While Izuku remained in his bow, he looked at the principal in confusion, just like his mother and Toshinori. Toshinori clearly didn't read the full report about your results beyond what I mentioned about the similarities between your answers, or else he would know every question on the test performs several actions at once, all based on the reasoning and justification given by the test taker. There were a variety of psychological tests embedded in the reasoning puzzles. You might not have thought about it, but there was a purpose in asking for your reasoning, both logical and moral. A hero can have a tremendous quirk, yet not have that heroic spark Toshinori spoke of. That, more than questionable quirks and poor training, gets civilians and heroes killed. The fact your test so closely matched All Might, and this does include the more basic psychological aspects tested, is why we are here. He then returned to his tea, which no longer steamed. Let us move on then, Nedzu. There's much that we still need to explain to young Midoriya. Izuku straightened up and felt confidence flood his body at the smile, one that seemed to shout pride, though he wasn't sure why, directed at him. If you were to inherit One for All, you must be trained. You know well the form I take when I use my quirk. If I did not, the power coursing through me would rip my arms from their sockets and shatter my legs. Wait, Inko interjected. She shook, leaning against a table. I can't let you do that. I won't see my son injured in such a gruesome manner. Mom. Izuku paused, shocked that he had shouted. Why is it now that I'm so confident? In the face of Kacchan, I'm a coward. He paused in his thinking and glanced at Toshinori. Is it because of All Might? I do want to impress him, but he's already agreed to train me. Mom, this is what I want. If it means that I risk permanent injury, then I will continue towards my goals. You remember after we found out I was quirkless? There was something I wanted you to say to me, that I wish I had heard from you. He paused to suck in a deep breath. I wanted you to tell me I could be a hero. All Might is giving me that chance. I have to take it. Tears brimmed at the corners of his eyes. I want to help people, to be a hero. You've known this for as long as I have. Inko's eyes became teary, matching her son's. She stared at him for a few moments before the tears fell from her eyes and streaked her cheeks. If that's what you want, Izuku. I want to stop you, but I don't know if I can. You've wanted to be a hero for so long, she turned to Toshinori. You must promise me you will do everything in your power, and beyond, to protect my son and teach him. I'm entrusting his future to you. Blue eyes considered green ones for a moment before Toshinori nodded. Your wishes will be respected. I would be more concerned if you allowed Izuku to pursue this path without your own concerns. If something happens and you change your mind, please tell me. I've seen too many good friends suffer from terrible injuries to not warn you. However, there is more I need to tell both of you. He breathed in, his chest expanding, and then released a cathartic sigh. There was a moment as he hesitated, hand resting against the bottom of his oversized shirt, before raising his shirt. Both Izuku and Inko were horrified and fascinated by the spiraling purple scar on the left side of Toshinori's chest. I received this wound 3 years ago, fighting against a villain considered to be a fairy tale or a nightmare from the past by many pro-heroes. I barely survived, and the surgeries to save my life weakened my respiratory system and have played havoc with most of my other organs. These days, I struggle to hold my heroic form for more than 4 hours continuously every day. There are times where I can reach and even surpass 5, but those are fewer and further between. You mean, you can't be dying? Izuku said, shocked. You're our symbol of peace. What would we do without you? Toshinori smiled and released his shirt. He reached out, tentative, and rubbed Izuku's head. The boy flushed, yet some relief spread across his face. I won't be dying anytime soon. However, I have known for a while now that I will need a successor. I should be able to remain active for the years to come before I must pass along One for All or risk losing it. Nedzu and I, along with the Prime Minister and those he trusts most in a variety of sectors related to heroics, decided to select a candidate now instead of later when I could become desperate. How bad is it? Izuku asked, his question loaded with several others that raged inside him. If everyone knew how perilous the strength of the symbol of peace is, what would happen? We enjoy the peace and security we have thanks to All Might, but that's because we all assume he's still as strong as he was 10 years ago when he first appeared. And that villain that wounded him, where is he in all of this? Toshinori opened his mouth, prepared to speak, and then closed it. His scrawny fists tightened and he gritted his teeth. We suspected Toshinori will only be capable of holding his heroic form for a few hours daily in 5 years, and from there it will probably go downhill quickly, Nedzu said, catching onto Toshinori's discomfort. Recovery Girl knows better than anyone just how long he'll be able to continue as All Might, but we're hoping we can make it until you get your provisional license. How early would that be? Nedzu considered Izuku for a long moment before replying. The provisional hero license exam is held at the end of every June and September. You could potentially have it during your first year, although most don't attempt the exam until their second year. Classes take them together, which is the main reason so few attempt as first years. That's not much time, Inko Midoriya said, fidgeting. Do either of you think he could be ready in 5 years for such a large burden? I have to be, Izuku said, his voice low and nervous. All Might may no longer be the symbol we all rely upon by then. I'm to be his successor, the inheritor of his quirk. It's for me to do, Mom. His eyes met her. Believe in me, Mom, as I believe in All Might. A brief moment passed, as Inko's eyes grew wet, tears threatening to spill over. After a few moments of holding back, her tears spilt forth and she began crying. She crossed the room faster than most pro-heroes and pulled Izuku into a tight hug. Oh, what did I do to deserve a son like you? She looked up, her head resting on Izuku's shoulders. When does he start? Dagoba Municipal Seaside Park, Saturday at 7. The sun had just risen over Dagoba Municipal Seaside Park when Izuku arrived. The cool waves glowed with a faint green sheen from the light. The beach itself was covered with junk haphazardly stacked by both man and nature, going from as high as his ankles to twice his height. In a cleared area nearest was a teal truck with a long flatbed and Toshinori. The gangly man smiled as the green-haired youth approached. Are you ready to begin your training, young Midoriya? Izuku nodded and Toshinori held out his hands. As you can see, I have set up 4 green flags to mark off a section of the beach for private use. This area is for you and your training. It's quite simple, if strenuous. Clear your section of all trash. Izuku looked around frantically. The flags were over 100 meters apart and the beach itself was at least 20 feet from the concrete barriers to where the waves lapped the most recent deposits. All by myself. Of course, Toshinori said. With a puff of smoke, he was All Might. Izuku vaguely remembered a brief mention as to why the hero used smoke in more public transformations, but the specifics were lost to him. We must prepare you for my quirk and the strain it can cause. You remember what I said in your apartment, correct? With a shaky nod, Izuku agreed. One for all. Not in public, young Midoriya, All Might said, leaning in. Just call it your quirk, or something similar. As I was saying, the queer irk has the potential to destroy my body. He shook, imagining his limbs being blown off his body by anime-styled gushes of blood. Exactly. In order to prevent such destruction, we must build you up. That is why we are here. Your training will strengthen your body, increasing your durability and building muscle. Izuku nodded and then asked, and how did it all come here? If it's just a dumping grounds, then won't the mess grow faster than I can move it? All Might frowned. I have been told that currents take garbage dumped in the water and deposit it here. Of course, this has been building up for years now, so with dedication and some luck you should be able to finish. And as motivation, I will give you a special prize if you finish in 10 months. By doing so, I will pass on my quirk to you. If not, then I will wait until you are 13. A pack of seagulls flew overhead and as they squawked, Izuku considered the mounds and hills of junk. Can I do this as in 10 months? Just as the thought crossed his mind, he shook his head. All Might believes I can. He may not say it, but I know he does. Why else would he offer his quirk so soon? However, training won't be enough. Sleep and food are important, plus you're still in school. All Might pulled out a stack of paper, bound with what Izuku feared was duct tape. This here is my 10-month American dream plan. With it, you should clear your section of beach and be ready to receive my quirk. He handed the plan over to Izuku, who scanned it. The boy frowned, flipping through the pages. Why are parts crossed out? Oh, well, that was once my Make America Great Again plan, but the tanning beds weren't appropriate for your goals, All Might said, a little flush. I was in a funk when I developed it a couple years ago. That's also why I threw out page 13, but that's a story for when you're older. With a dumb nod, Izuku accepted the plan. It crinkled when he clenched his fist and grinned at All Might. Let's begin. Toshinori smiled as he arrived at the seaside park 10 months after Izuku's training began. The morning air was more chilly than crisp, with the sun just poking over the horizon. What potential he has. Even with that concerning period where he overworked himself, Midoriya has surpassed my expectations. Whether I will be passing my quirk on now or in a few years I will find out today. I hope he has succeeded. There was a few times where others had maliciously tossed garbage into the section he has been clearing. Even so, I told both Nedzu and his mother that I would only pass it to him if he makes the deadline. He stepped onto the stairs leading down the beach and paused. The beach between the 4 flags he had set up was clear of trash, except for the truck Izuku had been loading so the trash could be properly disposed of. Toshinori grinned and said, oh my goodness. With his final word, he expanded into All Might and began towards his pupil. Standing on the truck, Izuku threw his head back and screamed, fierce and primal. Ah! It hung in the air as the boy turned to All Might. Through his exhaustion, he grinned. I did it, All Might. I finished cleaning my section. The boy's smile faded, his eyes rolled, and he fell from the truck's roof. He landed in All Might's arms, new muscles glinting in the morning light. I'm extremely proud of you, young Midoriya. You've exceeded all of my expectations and even finished cleaning the section I had laid out for you. He set Izuku down so he could lean against the truck. I must admit that I feared you wouldn't finish, and for that I'm disappointed in myself. He hung his head and bowed to Izuku. Forgive me for my oversight. There's nothing to forgive, All Might, Izuku said, panting. He pushed away from the truck and stood tall, tears leaking. All of this was possible because of you, I've been blessed. This is all your hard work, Midoriya. Enough with the tears, young Midoriya. You have proven yourself and forged the foundations of your future as the inheritor of my power. You earned it, fair and square. He plucked a hair and held it out. Accept it by swallowing this hair. There was a long moment as Izuku stared at All Might blankly. And then he collapsed, face first into the sand as an off-colored All Might bobblehead washed ashore. Chapter 3. It was the ice-cold towel being applied to his forehead that woke Izuku. His eyes flicked open and when his head drifted right, he watched, confused, as his mother broke into tears. Oh Izuku, she wailed, leaning over to hug him close. When Mr. Yagi arrived with you in his arms, I was very worried. He told me what you did and while I'm disappointed you pushed yourself so hard, I'm also proud. She released his sore and aching body, sniffling back her tears, and smiled. He left you a letter, which I placed on your desk. Feel free to read it once you feel better. She leaned over, kissed the towel on his forehead, and scuttled out of the room. I hope she makes katsudon. I'm so hungry and that sounds amazing, especially after finishing All Might's test. He sat up and looked around his room. I really hope he didn't see my room. I might not be able to look him in the eye for a week if he has. On his desk, just as his mother had said, was a letter. It was a crisp white with a gold seal. Izuku stared at the letter, bed sheets clenched in his hands. For a few moments, he considered remaining in bed and opening the letter later, when the soreness from his last push early in the morning passed. His gaze remained on the letter as he thought back on what little he had spoken about with All Might. Was the hair a joke? Did he leave it in there? How does consuming his hair pass along the quirk? Is it the DNA or does the hair appear when he decides to pass one for all on? Will he continue to be All Might as he claimed or will the worst come to pass and he'll lose his connection to his quirk? Could me swallowing the hair make him lose his powers sooner? Izuku knew there was only one way to answer his questions. He swung out of bed and crossed his room with a trembling hobble. Sitting down with a sigh, he opened the envelope. A folded letter and a small plastic bag fell out. Inside the bag was the same thick hair All Might had offered to him right before he had passed out. Instead, he opened the letter and snorted at the massive, blocky hand that consumed most of the page. He read, "Dear young Midoriya, it is I, All Might, writing to you like a normal person. This letter is to congratulate you on your success and to explain how to gain my quirk. As I said, you must consume my hair. My quirk, one for all, transfers from vessel to vessel through the consumption of DNA. It will take time before you can use it, but fear not. I will oversee your training. NEDZU has been kind to offer the usage of AUA facility for your personal use. I have yet to check it, but I suspect it will work splendidly. It just happens to be in between your residence and your school. Your mentor, All Might." Beneath All Might's message was a second one, written in a neat, tiny script. Izuku was surprised by a second message, but read it with the same interest as All Might's. To Midoriya Izuku, as UA, high school's primary nurse and a close friend of Yagi Toshinori, best known as All Might, there are some facts about the quirk, one for all, that you should know. As you become more accustomed to your new quirk, All Might will slowly lose his ability to use his until he reaches a point where he is, by every understanding, quirkless. This is due to his injury at the hands of the most dangerous villain we know of rather than the transference of the quirk one for all, so please do not worry. I hope you already know much of what I have written, but he was always so forward-looking that he passes over these types of details. It is well known at UA just how the youth view him, so please do not blame yourself when he is forced to retire. While I cannot deny the transference will weaken All Might, it is insignificant compared to what happened to previous inheritors. For now, I recommend that you only focus on trying to feel the power of your new quirk until you begin your training with All Might. A diet and exercise routine will be mailed to your place of residence before your first training session, which I and those members of the staff of UA who know about One for All will oversee. Yours, Shuzunji Chio, Recovery Girl. The letter slid from his grasp as Izuku processed what he had read. All Might will be training me. I wonder how long until I'll be able to use Detroit Smash like him. Oh, I probably should come up with new attack names and, he paused and realized how little he had done in terms of his own identity as a hero. He grabbed the stack of 6 journals. He had finished the 5th one a month into his beach training and number 6 was filling faster than the past ones even as his handwriting improved, and flipped through them. In none of them was there a costume design or a list of possible hero names. I've been so concerned about how others use quirks that I never considered what hero Midoriya Izuku would become. He leaned back so he could look at the blank ceiling. His fingers rolled with a haphazard rhythm as he entertained hero names. Kid Might, All Might Jr. I can't use any of those. I want to be able to connect myself to him, but those make me sound like some weird fanboy or clone. And I know nothing of combat and the quirk is rather destructive, so I'll need to protect my limbs. Izuku leaned forward in a moment of inspiration and almost slammed his forehead into the desk. Opening his 6th journal, he flipped through to the last page and began to sketch. He soon had a rough sketch of a man wearing a costume with a utility belt around the waist, gauntlets that stretched from the fingertips to the elbows, and knee-high boots with thigh supports. Other details, including colors, could wait as he tapped his pencil at the page's top. Izuku, are you feeling better? His mother asked, opening the door. She looked from the bed to the desk where Izuku was at and smiled. Toshinori told me that when you woke that you would only be a few hours from having a quirk. Is it true? Izuku smiled, dopey and confused. After a moment, he blinked and turned to the plastic bag that was inside the envelope. He held it before his face. All Might will start becoming even weaker if I eat this, but if I don't then I may not be ready to inherit the role as the symbol of peace when he retires. His fingers opened the bag and he pulled the hair out. He took 2 long breaths, put the hair into his mouth, and swallowed. His mother shouted, "Why are you eating a hair?" Meanwhile, Izuku's face twisted. Why would a hair be sour? I didn't even chew it. I ate the hair so I could receive his quirk, Izuku said, his face twisted by the persistent sour taste. His mother nodded, his expression uncertain about what she had just heard. Well, there's some katsudon ready for you to eat. I got a call from that nice principal about your training. The facility is between here and school, so walking there and coming home should be simple. Izuku stared at the rusting factory, frowning. His mother had finally relented and handed him the address before school the day of his first session. He was now doubtful of every statement it was between home and school, given he had spent nearly an hour searching for the facility. While technically on the route to school, the address was for the loading bay and not the front gates. He was excited to learn how to control his new quirk. It had taken several attempts, but the sensation of one for all coursing through his body was now as familiar as breathing. His attempts to access his quirk became successful when he discovered a second message from All Might on the back of the letter. When you are ready, clench your buttcheeks and shout, smash. The shock of the quirk's power filling him had led to him nearly jumping through his ceiling in the 2 apartments above. As such, Izuku was wary of touching his new quirk. The warnings of negative side effects had stuck with him, and the benefit of Recovery Girl overseeing his first training session reassured his decision to withhold from using One for All, beyond feeling it course through his body. I should be thankful I never tried to move while doing so. I was so jittery with raw power that I'd likely snap several bones just sneezing or moving my toes. He had been terribly sore and fortunate that he didn't have classes the day after he first touched his quirk. Yet the sensation of One for All and the power it had could become intoxicating. No wonder they were so picky about who could succeed All Might. If this power fell into a villain's hands, they could topple the government and our society of heroes. Sighing, he crossed the street, went up a concrete staircase, and knocked on the only regular door in sight. Tired black eyes regarded him for a moment before the door was unlocked. It swung open and Izuku stepped inside. He watched the tired man close the doors and grinned. It's good to see you again, Eraserhead. Eraserhead sighed. Just call me Aizawa, Midoriya. UA doesn't want any of this getting out into the public. Between the public and their frantic worrying whenever All Might hasn't been spotted in several hours, the voracious media, and treacherous villains, you would only paint a target the size of Mount Fuji on your back. Only those related to pro heroes receive any formal training before entering a school like UA, and given your record as being quirkless, the school doesn't want to field the questions that'll come from these sessions becoming public knowledge. Okay then, Aizawa. Are you just here to watch the door? Aizawa ignored the question and led Izuku into the facility. The rusty exterior soon gave way to off-color white tile on all surfaces. Covered lights hung from long cables, illuminating the room's center. Toshinori stood there in a shirt and dress pants a few sizes too large. His blue eyes watched Izuku approach. I will take over from here, Aizawa, Toshinori said. Please join the others watching from above. Izuku frowned. Above, he looked up and saw that Principal Nedzu and several pro heroes he assumed were UA instructors stood on walkways above them. Amongst them was a short, old woman wearing a white medical coat. She leaned on a cane, focused on him in a way that reminded him of the quirk test he had gone through at age 4. That must be Recovery Girl. I'll have to thank her for her message later. Well, young Midoriya, Toshinori began, are you ready to begin your quirk training? The words were strange to his ears, but Izuku could help but smile. Of course, I've felt One for All's power several times, but I haven't used it yet. The warnings I've received make me nervous. Understandable. Toshinori flexed and filled his clothes with muscles. All Might's booming voice filled the room. Now before we begin with your training, you should understand that it might take a while before your body is able to withstand and control your new power. Thus, you should do your best to regulate and contain it. We don't want it to burst forth uncontrollably. For now, I would suggest limiting yourself to 5% of what you feel. Less would be better, but I understand how difficult it can be at first. Izuku nodded, staring at his right hand, clenched into a fist. It's like microwaving Katsudon. Too much energy or too much exposure can ruin it. All Might nodded, although with a confused look upon his face, and stepped aside. He held out his arm and said, let us see your first attempt, young Midoriya. I want to see how much and how well you can control One for All. Ignoring the murmurs from above, Izuku nodded. The floor before him opened and a punching machine rose. He waited for it to stop before taking in a deep breath, pulled back his arm as it filled with One for All, and threw a punch. SMMAAASSHHHH. Izuku shouted as he nailed the machine. The metal surface warped around his fist for a moment before shattering into 100 chunks of sparking metal and electronics. He let his arm fall to his side and panted from the effort. That was the moment a terrible pain shot up his arm, as if it was a window broken by a ball being thrown through it. His eyes followed All Might's concerned and worried frown. There was a moment as Izuku stared at his red, mangled arm before he screamed, hoarse and frightened. It was only after his arm was fixed via Recovery Girl's quirk, he would deny for years that he hadn't felt a little burst of happiness when the stern yet kind woman kissed him, that Izuku's terror abided. He watched with a nervous fidget, as Nedzu lectured All Might about proper teaching methods. After that, he was allowed to return to training with one extra safety measure. Aizawa would erase his quirk if it threatened to destroy one of his limbs. Now that you have rested, let's try something smaller. All Might opened a bag that he had been given and pulled out an orange. For this, you are to apply one for all to only your right index finger. Your goal is to poke 10 holes without injuring your finger. Izuku nodded as he took the orange. I need to contain one for all even more. Even if I only use a tiny fraction of the power, it should be enough to finish. He stared at the finger All Might had told him to use and watched as it glowed, his quirk filling it with power. His other hand slowly guided the orange onto it, until his fingertips blistered from the fruit's acid. He hissed as he removed his finger from the orange and stared, flabbergasted, at the injury. All Might approached, frowning, and looked at his finger. That is strange. I have never seen one for all react in such a peculiar manner, but then nearly every injury training with this quirk has been centered on broken bones and not skin irritation. Recovery Girl checked his injury, healed him, and Nedzu took over as All Might released his muscular form. Until further notice, it would be best if you met with All Might 3 times every other week. Please continue the orange exercise at home until the next session in 2 days. I would recommend that you move faster than you did today. Hopefully that will prevent the issue with the orange's citric acid. The white rodent nodded to Izuku and departed with the gathered UA instructors. They all made Izuku nervous, especially since none of them had reacted to either of his short training sessions with anything beyond whispers and worried stares. To be sent home after 15 minutes and less than a minute of using one for all was disappointing. Thus, Izuku's training continued in a similar manner. Every other week, he would meet with All Might, Aizawa, and Recovery Girl at the facility. His only goal was to stop injuring himself whenever he used one for all, something that All Might continued to claim would come with time. Beyond his official training, he continued to strengthen his body. While the nature of his injuries decreased in severity, he had yet to land a single blow that didn't injure a finger, his whole hand, or the entire arm. More often than not, his attempts were stopped by Aizawa's quirk. Even when he would channel it elsewhere, he was frustrated by the fact he continued to struggle in reining in the quirk's overwhelming power. It was on an early spring afternoon 2 years after Izuku Midoriya accepted one for all that his first true breakthrough occurred. During the past week, he had been thinking about the variety of scenarios that he had been placed in while attempting to control his quirk. While he no longer suffered from serious injuries, there was a block on his capacity to use more than 2%. There's one thing every test and scenario have in common: I've never tried punching a real person. With that thought, he had asked All Might about it. Ah, good question, young Midoriya. I hoped you would be able to control one for all before throwing you into a live combat scenario. It appears I was wrong. So, Izuku asked, probing for more. Then you must punch me. Izuku blinked, dumbstruck, before shouting. What do you mean punch you? I can't do that. You have that terrible injury and you've been spitting up blood for the past month and, he spiraled into a buzzing mess of mutters as the three heroes watched on. His training included tightening his analytical abilities and he found that mumbling and muttering aloud helped to better focus his thoughts. I can withstand it, All Might said as he laid a hand on Izuku's shoulder, quieting him. The boy flinched before his eyes met his hero's. Oh, okay then, he said. Taking a step back, he filled his right arm with his quirk, threw a punch, and hit All Might's muscular form. As Toshinori was surrounded in a plume of smoke, Izuku's right arm didn't break. He stared at it, resting against his mentor's chest. You did great, Izuku. The boy found Toshinori's smiling face and couldn't hold back the tears threatening to spill. He rubbed them away when his mentor ribbed him about crying so much. I'm so happy I've reached this point, Izuku said. I had become worried I would never be able to truly control my quirk, and that I would fail you. You could never fail me, Toshinori said. You have proven yourself time and time again, proven that you were the right choice. He straightened, his gaunt form more scarecrow than hero. Yet I must warn you. Our training will grow more intense. Your slow progress led me to ask one of my mentors to aid you. I don't know if you are familiar with Gran Torino, but he is and always will be a better teacher than me. Izuku frowned. There's a goal you have for me, isn't there? Toshinori nodded. By the time you enter UA, you will be able to control a quarter of your power instinctively. Chapter 4. And jab. The young man's fist flicked out from its resting place near his face. Instead of hitting his opponent's jaw, it was deflected with a forearm block. There is only one reason my attack was slow and it did little damage. Erasing my quirk gets more and more annoying each time you do it, Aizawa. I'm past the point where I can fight without ruining my arms. Aizawa took a step back and brushed away his flowing hair. His eyes returned to their natural dark color as he rubbed his left shoulder. It beats being hit by your quirk-powered punches, Midoriya. I'm surprised you haven't broken any of my bones yet. When All Might told me he wanted you to test 20% in combat, I thought he was joking. I was under the impression that you were training to control a quarter of your strength before beginning to use it in combat scenarios. Izuku grinned, rubbing at his sore knuckles. Over 2 years had passed since he had his first major breakthrough using and controlling One for All. Although it had taken a few days for his body to truly adapt to the power, he had been thankful that his arms and legs no longer snapped like dry twigs. Only Recovery Girl was more thankful that he had control over his quirk's power, since there had been times when her healing quirk just wasn't enough to fully heal him before he went home. With UA High's entrance exam in 10 months, he felt a little nervous. I may have all of this power, but it's hard to keep up appearances as quirkless Izuku amongst my peers. Things would be easier if I could just tell them that I have an overpowered quirk that took time to emerge without accidentally destroying my body. Worse, Kachan is aiming to go to UA and I can't imagine him not getting in. I have until February to reach quarter power, Izuku said. The sooner I reach it, the better control I will have at UA. Plus, All Might is trying to convince Nedzu to make you my homeroom instructor, even if you've failed 154 students from the heroics program and any familiarity would look odd. Aizawa frowned and raised his arms for combat. His black eyes turned red and Izuku felt the block on his quirk. Let's continue, Midoriya. Standing around chatting is illogical and won't get you to your goal. Technique will help you better control your quirk and use it effectively and efficiently. Izuku withheld rolling his eyes as he returned to a fighting stance. When he had reached 10% several months ago, Aizawa talked All Might into teaching him hand-to-hand combat. He had initially protested the idea, but when he was shown pictures of Toshinori winning the few martial art tournaments left from his years before becoming All Might, he had jumped straight into training. It's difficult, but this is just another part of becoming a hero, Izuku thought as he shuffled towards Aizawa. The older hero's quirk was beginning to wear off until he blinked. One for All flowed through Izuku's body and he closed the little distance between them during the blink. His power fled just before the blow could land and Aizawa's binding scarf stretched and looped around his arm, pulling it back enough to make the shoulder ache. You can do better than that, Midoriya, Eraserhead said, his disappointment clear and full on his tongue. Even knowing how someone's quirk works can backfire. From time to time I blink while in combat as a way to trick my opponents and draw them into a trap. He released the scarf and Izuku fell to his knees, suddenly tired. We're done for today. Wash up and go home. Make sure to keep strengthening your body. All Might called me earlier and told me to tell you that the beach has a dozen couches on it. Not sure where they came from, but UA did get a new set for the teacher lounges. Izuku nodded, faintly aware that the couches on the beach Aizawa spoke of were likely the old UA ones. He had not only continued to clear the section he had first been tasked with, but over time he had begun to cover more and more of the beach until cleaning every inch was upon him. With a roll of his shoulders, all of the soreness and tension built during the training session flushed through him from where it had built up. He stepped into the changing rooms and shed the close-fitting workout clothes he had worn. His nose twitched as their rank scent passed over him, but soon enough he was stepped into the shower. It hissed and a stream of warmth washed over him. Izuku Midoriya reflected on how much had changed since he was 10 and quirkless. He had shot up like a weed in the past month and he was confident he'd be taller than All Might one day, minus the odd bangs that flipped up whenever he entered his heroic form. His shoulders had begun to widen, but they were nowhere near ready to hold and balance the impressive network of muscles his mentor showed off whenever he could. Even though it was expected, it still hurt to watch All Might's power shrink as his grew. The symbol of peace operated for only 3, maybe 4 hours every day, and his time was in a precarious slide. He remembered how his growth and Toshinori's decay were described as 2 fires, one growing while the other shrank. It was heartbreaking, knowing that his mentor couldn't help as many people as he once could, but that energy instead was thrown into training Izuku. He washed himself, thinking on how even his school life had changed. While things had been normal for most of the years since acquiring a quirk, the sight of Katsuki's explosive quirk was a reminder of the fact that as much as things changed, some things in life were constants. It seems odd, wanting him to become my rival. Whenever I listen to All Might talk about his encounters with Endeavor, it feels natural to think back to how things once were with Kacchan and how I hope things can be. Hopefully things will change when we're at UA. Neither of us will settle for less. Izuku finished up, an embarrassing shriek bursting from his mouth when the water went from steaming hot to frigid cold in a moment. He left the training facility, glanced towards where his school was in the distance and shook his head. Until UA. Calm down, all of you. The teacher shouted. Heavy bags hung under his narrow, bloodshot eyes. Now that you're third years, it's time to seriously think about your futures. He shook a pile of papers in his hand. I should hand out these future career forms, but I know you'll all write down that you want to be heroes and forget to put anything else down. The class shouted and cheered. Izuku was tempted to roll his eyes at the display. Maybe half have quirks that would make for viable heroes and most of them would struggle to break away from those with similar quirks. I know. You all have such wonderful quirks, but please stop using them in school. A harsh and taunting voice cut through the jumbled voices. Don't lump me in with these losers, teach. Bakugo Katsuki leaned back in his chair, feet resting on his desk. His grin was smug and arms crossed. None of them have a quirk worthy of being a hero, like mine. Katsuki grinned and laughed as their classmates yelled at him. The teacher used his quirk to raise his voice over the commotion. Ah yes, Bakugo, if I remember correctly, you've been aiming for UA for years. The boy nodded and grinned as more jeers were sent his way. I aced the mock exam. I am clearly the only one that's UA material. Katsuki sneered at his loudest detractors. Just you all watch. I'll surpass All Might and become the greatest hero of all time. Nobody will beat me. Oh, the teacher said, less ignoring Katsuki than remembering something else. Izuku sighed, already knowing what was about to be said. You're not the only one going for UA, Bakugo. Midoriya's name is written down, but that's to be expected from his HRLT results. The room went quiet as 12 pairs of eyes turned on Izuku. Katsuki slowly stood, his back towards Midoriya. That's correct, sir, Izuku said. He straightened in his seat, defying the quirkless image he had yet to break. Now's as good a time to break it. The silence continued for a moment longer before the class broke out into laughter. All but Katsuki, who finally turned around. Here it comes. Katsuki slammed his hand on Izuku's desk, just like he had years ago. I didn't know that UA offered a sidekick course. It's not like someone without a quirk could succeed in the hero course and I can't see you entering any of the other courses for those incapable of becoming a hero. He leaned in, his quirk smoking against the desk. If you really think you're worthy, show me what makes you think you can get into UA after school. Maybe at that weird run-down place you go to. Izuku froze, certain that his shocked look not only pleased Katsuki, but also sparked a new series of rumors and whispers about him. While they had died down after his success on the HRLT, those students in middle school who hadn't been in the same primary school as him reignited them anew, trying desperately to determine what his quirk really was until even they had to admit he was quirkless. At least they don't know what he said. I may have to lose anyone curious enough to follow me to the facility. Fine, Izuku finally said. If you're so concerned, meet me there after class. Alone and with no followers, he added. The rest of the school day passed in a rush, if Izuku was willing to ignore the pointed glares from Katsuki and the curious frowns of his classmates. When the bell finally rang, he quickly threw his bag over his shoulder and slipped out of the classroom. The walk to the facility went by in a haze, although when he looked at his phone after arriving, he figured that someone had tried to follow him, if only for a couple minutes. Bakugo arrived a few minutes later, teeth gritted in frustration. They entered together and Toshinori and Aizawa were surprised to see the two boys together. "Who is your friend, young Midoriya?" Toshinori asked, shockingly wary. "We aren't friends," Katsuki said, pushing past Izuku. He stuck a thumb back at the green-haired boy. "I just don't think he's worthy to go to UA." Toshinori frowned and crossed his arms. "And what makes you think you can judge who is and isn't worthy to attend UA? I happen to be close friends with several of the instructors and from what they've told me, I believe young Midoriya here is an excellent chance at entering UA. Of course, I should mention that they are the ones allowing us to use this facility. UA would be insane to allow All Might's successor to attend a different school though," Izuku thought as Katsuki snorted. "I'd say the biggest issue is that he would be a liability. Even if he could get past being quirkless, I couldn't trust him to guard my back in a fight." "And how could we change this opinion?" Toshinori asked. Katsuki grinned, fierce and vicious. As the towering smoke plume of an explosion rose from his right hand, he said, "Let us fight. If he can hold his own against me, I'll keep quiet. Maybe even change my opinions about Deku." Izuku judged from Toshinori's puzzlement that not a single word about his obnoxious nickname had gotten to him. They exchanged a long, meaningful look before the older man sighed. He nodded and walked away from the discolored sparring area. The two boys walked over to it and once inside, white panels near the edges of the area flicked up. "Remember that this is a spar and not a real fight," Toshinori said after a few moments. "You'll be fighting until either one of you gives up, is knocked unconscious, or ejected from the ring. You may begin." The instant the words left Toshinori's mouth, Katsuki blasted forward. Izuku stepped back, arms raised into an instinctive position. "I'll need to get Aizawa something nice after this." The blonde then used a second series of explosions to launch above his opponent, grinning from the shocked expression. With gritted teeth, Izuku dodged an explosion aimed at his head, throwing a punch he knew wouldn't connect with Katsuki, but instead create shockwaves to disrupt the other boy's flight. The shockwave knocked them both back and while it took several seconds, Katsuki was able to regain his balance in the air. Izuku was already airborne, streaking towards him as he drew an arm back. With thunderous explosions, Bakugo launched himself so he could strike at Midoriya's exposed side, once he threw his punch that is. The green-haired boy clicked his teeth as his opponent burst away from his blow, but then used it to spin himself so his legs, still coursing with one for all, could strike Katsuki. The kick connected and they both fell out of the air. Izuku landed on his hands before rolling onto his back and then springing to his feet. Katsuki was already getting onto his feet. The green-haired boy lunged, narrowing the power of one for all into fine strands. He pulled them from his legs and into his arms. There was a long moment as they stared at each other, nearly nose to nose, before Izuku surprised Katsuki with a blistering jab to his face. Sent flying, the blonde tried to use his explosions to reorient himself and return, but instead sent him further from the ring. His landing was rough and as the two boys panted, Toshinori said, "Midoriya Izuku is the winner." When Inko Midoriya received a call from Toshinori, she couldn't think what he could want. While she knew exactly where her son went to train, she hadn't been there in years. As Aizawa, the pro-hero eraserhead, as Izuku liked to remind her, led her inside, up a staircase, and into an office, she was surprised to find Katsuki Bakugo, that rude boy her son had known for as long as he could remember, there with Izuku and Toshinori. More shocking was the bandages marring Katsuki's frowning, contemplative face. A few minutes later, Mrs. Bakugo entered, a frown just disguising her kindling fury. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mrs. Midoriya," Mrs. Bakugo, Toshinori said. "I'm afraid that your sons got into a confrontation this afternoon. As you can see, Katsuki ended up being hurt in the midst of their conflict. Given that I have been helping young Midoriya with his difficult circumstances, I am very disappointed in what occurred this afternoon. Seeing the hero's frown increased her concern. They've both agreed to wait until you arrived to talk. Bakugo spoke first, loud and angry. I want to know where he got that quirk from. I know he didn't have that quirk when we were kids. It was a gift. Izuku's voice was small and he appeared to be trying to make himself look even smaller. The quirk I have was given to me by its previous vessel. She died shortly after the transfer. Inko frowned. She remembered Toshinori telling Izuku about his predecessor, but that had been years ago when he had been curious about who had won for all before him. All Might inherited it from a woman, she thought. Did they agree to make her the one who gave it to him? As if anyone would believe such a blatant lie, Mrs. Bakugo shouted. Inko vaguely remembered the woman being generous, but that was years before either had a son. This brat fucking took advantage of the system and hid his fucking quirk. I want to know how he got away with it and why he would need training from a walking skeleton like you, Mr. Yagi. Please, Mrs. Bakugo, Toshinori said, hands held up. Part of the reason I was asked to work with young Midoriya is because I knew the woman who passed hers to him. Plus, there have been rumors for years about quirks that can be transferred or stolen. Whether you believe me is for you to decide, but it sounds like you won't. He has admitted to me about the problems he has had with your son, and I must say that the fact things got this out of hand speaks volumes about whatever issues have formed between these two boys. He sighed and rubbed the back of his head. I would recommend that they avoid each other as much as possible, or at the very least just not speak to each other. What punishment your sons face for their actions today is up to you. Just know that I will be telling my friend at UA about this. What impact it has upon their admittance or placement, I cannot say. Otherwise, I suggest you head home for tonight. He turned to Izuku. Tomorrow's session will be cancelled. Izuku's head hung as he walked home, side by side with his mother. While being able to prove to Katsuki that he was no longer that quirkless kid he could kick around felt nice, seeing just how easily he could injure someone, how easily his quirk could get the best of him, filled him with remorse and regret. I'm disappointed with how you used your quirk today, Izuku, his mother said. Her hands fidgeted and her eyes couldn't rest on him. I understand you've had problems with Bakugo for years, but seeing the outcome of how you went about handling your problems with him worries me. While he did start it, you never should have gone as far as you did. And this is all made worse because I knew Toshinori was preparing to recommend you for UA's heroics program. While he may still do so, I know he is more concerned about you and your future as a hero than he has been in years. Izuku's voice disappeared. He wasn't sure how to respond. I didn't mean to hurt him. I held back and only used 15%. And your power is still dangerous, Inko said. They stopped before their apartment building. But, I am proud that you stood up for yourself. She turned her son to face him and smiled. Just promise me you'll do better. Izuku nodded, relieved. That conversation stuck with him as the months passed. While Katsuki now gave him a wide berth, the explosive boy glared at him even fiercer than he had before. Their school was awash with rumors about what had happened, yet the only truth was that he had a quirk when before he hadn't. At least they don't know how long I have had it. And then February arrived. UA. High's entrance exam loomed over Izuku as he broke through the threshold All Might had set for him, but made a request before Toshinori's final discussion with the principal about his acceptance. I have spoke with Nedzu about the recommendation, Toshinori said, early on the day of the exam. The 2-1 for all users sat on the seaside beach where they had first built their relationship as mentor and mentee. While he was concerned about your incident last year with Bakugo, he has accepted my recommendation for admission into UA. High's heroic program. He has also decided to allow you to take the entrance exam like most students. I understand that since your fight with Bakugo you have been considering taking the exam to test yourself as a hero. He turned to Izuku and smiled. I must admit that your decision to do this makes me proud to be your mentor. Plus, the other heroes are excited to see you in action. When they heard that my recommendation wanted to take the entrance exam, bets began changing hands. Just remember that you won't be eligible for anything that is based upon the exam scores. You have, by all accounts, already been accepted. He smiled, proud, and then coughed up blood, covering his mouth. Izuku watched the waves crash against the clean shore. We should both get going then. Today is the day. Toshinori nodded and expanded into all might. Yes it is, young Midoriya. I'm excited to see what you have learned about being a hero. Chapter 5. The campus of UA. High loomed over Izuku when he arrived for the entrance exam. He walked through the high, arcing gate that allowed students and visitors alike through the high walls surrounding the campus, and took the opportunity to look around as he approached the main building. The structure was the tallest on campus, with 4 glass towers a dozen stories high connected by enclosed glass bridges. At its base were 3 doors, guarded by marble pillars and inscribed with numbers for each class level, 1 through 3. He stepped away from the path so he could stare at the building with a smile. I'll be a student here soon. Taking the exam is just a formality at this point. Although, I do have to wonder what all is on the exam. Get out of my fucking way, Deku. Izuku spun and blanched at the sneer Katsuki directed his way. With how frosty their relationship had been since their fight at the facility, he was surprised by how hostile the blonde was. I see I'm not the only one excited, Kachan. Katsuki passed him and then paused. He turned back, still sneering, and said, don't try and dictate how I'm supposed to feel, Deku. Don't think you can pass if you get in my way. It's weird to know that was Kachan being polite, Izuku thought as he watched Katsuki enter UA. He shook his head and followed, ignoring the curious and confused stares. Inside, he was handed a card with his information, including a chair number and a testing site code, and the instructions for the practical exam. Izuku followed the other potential students through several narrow hallways and up a spiraling staircase until they entered a dark auditorium. He spent a few minutes searching for his seat inside when he saw none other than Katsuki was in the seat beside his. We're probably bunched together by school for this part of the exam. The other boy glanced at him, glared, and then proceeded to ignore him for the 12 minutes it took for an instructor to finally arrive. The teacher wore black leather and studded metal, with a stereo rig around his neck and headphones on. His small mustache twitched as he shouted, "Welcome to today's live performance. Can I get a, hey?" He held his arms out towards the gathered examinees. The auditorium remained silent save for the echo of the teacher's words, "Hey, hey, hey, hey." The instructor carried on as if they had responded the way he wished. That's great, examinees. I'm here to break down the practical test you'll be taking this afternoon. Are you ready? Once more, the auditorium remained silent. Izuku glanced around, more amused than shocked that everyone is so quiet and serious. Just shows you how serious getting into UA is when not even present Mike, the voice hero, can't get a response. That or he doesn't have any fans taking the test this year. Shut it, Katsuki growled. Izuku flushed and realized from the glares that his thoughts had slipped through his lips. It doesn't matter anymore, he mumbled. I might as well talk to myself while he gives out instructions. They're all on the handout anyways, and unless there's a trick, this formality is unnecessary. Present Mike continued his speech. Now the practical is the simple part of your examination today. Here's how it's laid out. You'll have 10 minutes in one of our cityscape simulation areas. Those few who do become students will become familiar with these locations by the time you graduate. Oh, and make sure to bring whatever you want. After this presentation, you'll be taking the written portion of the exam before heading out to your assigned testing locations. They must be separating kids from the same middle school, Katsuki said, looking at his card. Izuku sighed seeing an E, while his had a B. As those of you with familiar faces have realized, consecutive ID numbers are assigned other locations. You all were registered by the school you're coming from. I'll crush everyone, Katsuki said while a grin. He added to Izuku, I'll even beat you and all the weaklings in your group. Izuku nodded, his attention returning to present Mike's presentation. There are 3 types of villains in each testing location. Points are awarded based on difficulty of the villain you defeat. It should become clear just how many points each one is worth, but I won't spoil the surprise. Use your quirks to take them down and earn points. That's your goal. He paused and surveyed the room. The moving slides paused on a chart from the handout detailing the basics of the exam. Included were blurry images of the villains they were to fight. Being an anti-hero and attacking other examinees is prohibited and will result in either a loss of points or an immediate disqualification from the exam. Any questions? I have one, a boy with short black hair said, standing. Izuku saw that his glasses gleamed in the light coming from the presentation. He held up the handout and pointed at the blurry images being shown on the slide. There are 4 silhouettes on this sheet, which suggests that there are 4 types of villains, not 3. I'm concerned that this is an error. It would be embarrassing, especially for UA High, to have such an error involved with their entrance exam. This is Japan's top hero academy, and we have all come to become model heroes. He then turned and focused on Izuku. And you, with the curly hair. I've been able to hear your muttering throughout the entire presentation. Not only is it distracting, but also I can't help but wonder if you're as serious about UA as the rest of us. If not, please leave. I wouldn't want anyone worthy to enter this prestigious school to be barred because of someone's non-courteous habit. Izuku frowned, silent, as Katsuki snickered next to him. He felt a mix of glares and frowns being focused on him by others in the auditorium. Present Mike grinned. Good catch there, examinee 7111. You should know that the 4th type of villain is worth 0 points. It's an obstacle, not an enemy to be defeated. There'll be one at each site. They're gimmicks, meant to rampage and make the exam tougher for those who don't belong here. I can't tell you when they will appear, just that you should be ready to encounter it at any moment. Thank you, sir, the boy with glasses said. He bowed and sat down. It's like a video game, he added, loud enough for those around him. Present Mike smiled and waved, before saying, that's all from me. I'm gonna leave my listeners with our school motto. Plus ultra. Although he was aware of how expansive the UA campus was, Izuku couldn't help his shock upon seeing the several cityscape constructs tucked into the northwest corner of the campus. After the written portion, they had all been sent to a group of changing rooms before being led to their buses from the main building to the testing sites. Upon arrival, most of the others gathered in a group before the fence gate, standing several feet back. It's massive. Each cityscape has to be at least 20 square blocks if not larger. He scanned the crowd of examinees. All Might showed me a list of notable potential students, but I don't really see any here. They must be at the other sites, then. Hope Kachan enjoys himself. He was all grins and pleasant words when we separated, but then the written exam took 3 hours. There was a tap on his shoulder. Izuku turned to face the kid with glasses from earlier. So you're the kid who was muttering. His tone was formal, judgmental, and a hint curious. It was more mumbling, but sure. He frowned. Why do you ask? Other than being extraordinarily rude. I don't think you have temperament to be a hero. The boy crossed his arms and Izuku couldn't help but scowl. Don't talk about things you don't know about, Izuku said. For a moment, a different boy saying similar words floated in front of him and echoed in his mind. You don't have what it takes, Deku. He studied the boy in front of him and his eyebrows popped up at the sight of the short pipes emerging from the boy's calves. Are you related to Ignanium? Yes I am, the boy said, loud and prideful. A couple others glanced at them and begun whispering. That's cool, Izuku said. Izuku turned away and stalked off. A few others had watched their confrontation, but most were preoccupied with preparing for the exam. Izuku soon found himself standing before the chain-link fence keeping them out of the cityscape. I think I understand why Kachan likes to punch things, maybe even people, with his quirk. Just let them open the gate so I can take my frustration out on the villain bots. Begin. Izuku jumped and looked around until he, along with the other examinees at Site B, watched Present Mike emerge the tower on the cityscape's walls. He stared down at them, frowning. What's wrong? The test has started. Run. The die's been cast. Turning back to the entrance, Izuku grinned at the sight of the gate being drawn back and opening the way into the practical portion of the exam. He dashed forward, the rest of the examinees breathing down his back. With a frustrated snort, he channeled one for all into his legs and leapt into the sky. For a few seconds, he soared over the cityscape, free and unburdened. Then he saw the villains they would be fighting, robots. Just as they had been told, there were 3 varieties and as suggested, their point values were visible, being painted onto their hulls. Present Mike hadn't been joking about them being more difficult the higher the point value. Is that a rocket pod on the 3-pointers? He descended from the sky and landed amongst a half-dozen robots. In a blur of green hair and a white tracksuit, Izuku delivered a series of devastating blows. That should be 10 points. The 3-pointers will be tougher to find. Plus, Nedzu let slip that the cutoff last year was 52 points. I just need to get 42 to reach that mark. Hopefully the others don't complain if they find out I'm here because I want to be, not that I have to. He moved deeper into the cityscape, searching and destroying whatever robots he encountered. As the seconds ticked by, his point total racked up. Although he most often used quirk-powered fists, he took opportunities to use other techniques built up by his training. There was a close moment as a laser barely skirted his shoulder, pulverizing a 1-pointer he had crippled. He frowned at the blondie who had fired the beam and his obnoxious French accent, but smiled when the boy apologized. Izuku continued on, smashing robots until he broke the 52-point marker he had set for himself. Might as well keep going, Izuku justified. Kachan will be aiming for the high score and it would be interesting to see how he reacts when I beat his score. That was when the exam went mad. A building 2 blocks to his left exploded and screams and shouts echoed from the surrounding streets and alleys. Izuku redirected his path to head for the rising plume of dust and smoke. When he reached the wide avenue splitting the cityscape, he gaped at the party responsible for the destruction. The gimmick robot worth 0 points had emerged. It was 5 stories tall and its hands gripped a nearby building the same way he had held onto All Might whenever he had overexerted himself during training. 8 red eyes glowed and the robot's head shifted to stare down at the fledgling heroes with contempt. A chill raced through Izuku and his hands clenched. He knew it was worthless for his point totals, but that idealistic child, the one who wanted to be a hero, that leapt at the opportunity to become All Might's protege, wanted to see it knocked down, to have the knowledge he was capable of taking down such a large and dangerous enemy. All Might would take it on with a smile and a single punch. But me, am I just meant to stand here and stare? His eyes dropped from the robot into the rubble beneath it. It took only a moment, but he focused on a girl, one of her legs pinned by the stones that had fallen on her. Her face was pale, likely from overusing her quirk. How can I call myself a hero if I'm not willing to risk everything to help a single person? With that, he grinned and moved. Tenya Iida panted as he stopped running. He had been going full bore for close to 8 minutes. Taking a moment to pause and breathe felt amazing, especially with the dozens of points he had accumulated. He had nearly tripped and fallen upon the appearance of the gimmick robot, but once he found his footing, it was simple to get away. I would be threatening my chance to get into UA by fighting it. It has no purpose in determining whether we get in and my quirk isn't suited towards fighting that type of enemy without backup. He prepared to increase the distance between the gimmick and himself when a green and white blur rocketed past him. The wind rippled and Tenya stared at the blur, shocked. Whoa, what was that? Someone nearby asked. Instead of responding, Tenya watched as the blur stopped and the boy he had spoken with before the exam appeared. He stared, frowning. I was terribly rude to him before the exam, even if he had somewhat deserved. I'll apologize once we finish for the tone I used. He's probably going to get accepted and I would be mistaken to allow negative feelings with a fellow student and hero to persist. If we work together in the future, it would be best if we were at least polite and courteous, if not friendly. Hey, there's a girl pinned by the rubble. Another voice shouted. He must have gone to grab her. Tenya looked from the boy to the rubble nearest him and saw that there was a girl, her left leg pinned by rocks. The boy approached her, lifted the rock with one arm, pulled her out with the other, and in a blink and a couple heartbeats was next to him. Ah, thank you, the girl said, a little dizzy. She turned so that nobody was directly in front of her. I get nauseous from overusing my quirk, and that was a little too fast. Sorry, the green-haired boy said, rubbing his head abashed. I've never traveled with another person while using my quirk. It's no problem, she said. That was the moment her face turned green. She vomited and the surrounding examinees all jumped back. After finishing, she wiped her mouth and lowered her head so her bob cut hid her face. I'm sorry. Everyone in the vicinity paused and then turned to Tenya, who hadn't realized until then that he was the one who had spoke. He faced the green-haired boy and bowed. I was rude and made assumptions about you before the test. Please accept my apology. Before I do that, I need to finish up here. The boy pointed at the rampaging gimmick, which continued to approach. It had passed the rubble where the girl had been pinned and fortunately hadn't trampled it. The noise of its rampage had increased as it approached them and most of the examinees had retreated further away. I came to UA to become a hero, just like many others. However, I can't leave people in danger as long as I can do something. Tenya opened his mouth to say, nobody is in serious danger, but the boy leapt higher than he had when the exam began. There was a brief moment as he hung in the sky, drawing back his right arm. He blinked and suddenly the boy was falling and the robot was reeling, its head smashed in by a fierce blow. The boy landed, a crater around him, as the gimmick exploded and collapsed backwards towards where it had emerged. I accept your apology, the boy said, walking to the gathered group of shocked examinees. He bowed, not as deep as Tenya, and continued. My name is Midoriya Izuku and honestly, my muttering is a terrible habit I should have better control of. Plus, I was rude back then. Something you said reminded me of an incident last year where I got into a fight with someone I've known for years. It, rubbed me the wrong way as it had back then. No need to apologize for that. I'm Iida Tenya, he said, trying to hold back the shock from his face. Between his quirk and how he acts, he could easily be another All Might. The girl joined them, most of her dizziness gone. I'm Uraraka Ochako. Thanks for saving me back there, Midoriya. Midoriya grinned, his face flushed red. He must not get much praise. Just doing what any hero would do. It is, isn't it? Tenya turned to the gimmick wreckage as the exam ended. We all ran away, unaware we had left someone behind to get hurt just to save our own skins. I did the same, but Midoriya, he was a hero today. Izuku smiled at the letter in his hand. In the aftermath of the exam, he had watched Recovery Girl heal and patch up the other examinees. He had finished the 10 minutes without a single scratch, even from defeating the gimmick robot. The expected grazing and battering to his knuckles had been somehow avoided. When she came to inspect him, Recovery Girl could only shake her head with a relieved smile. She must still remember the worst of my injuries from when I was first learning how to control One for All. He opened the letter and holographic projector, small enough to sit in his palm, slid into his hand. It flashed and projected a screen. All Might stood there, grinning, his yellow pinstriped suit cleaned and pressed. Young Midoriya, it is I, All Might, here to give you your results and some news. I will be teaching at UA High starting this year. Izuku gasped. I should have seen this coming. I am his protege, so he'd want to be on hand to aid in my training. But how will he get around his 3-hour limit? Don't fret about me, young Midoriya. As long as you work towards your goals, things will be fine. Anyways, I'm just a temporary adjunct, or that is what we'll be telling the public. A long moment passed as he stared at the image of All Might, whose grin shifted slightly. And now that the dramatic pause has passed, I can safely say that you have been accepted. The instructors who have never seen you before were thoroughly impressed. In fact, both Nedzu and I are extraordinarily proud of the effort you put into the exam and the moral fiber you showed saving Miss Uraraka. Congratulations, Midoriya Izuku, and welcome to UA High. Chapter 6. And don't forget to make friends, Izuku's mother said, straightening his tie. I know you've had difficulties at previous schools, but UA is a fresh start for you, even if you share a class with that Bakugo boy. Maybe UA will even allow the two of you to become friends like you were before his quirk appeared. Thanks, Mom, Izuku said. You don't need to worry so much. There's a couple people I met during the practical and if they're in my class, I'll should have a quick friend or two in them. He pulled down on the light gray blazer that was part of UA High's uniform, a little guilty he hadn't told his mother any specifics about the exam. In the weeks since he received his acceptance, no moment had made entering his dream school not feel like a dream compared to this moment, about to head to his first day, dressed his new school uniform. Toshinori hadn't contacted him since the exam, so the multitude of questions he had about the school were forced to wait. Until now, he hoped. I hope we don't have to wait several weeks before we have our first class with him. The train from his home station to UA took 40 minutes. His UA uniform surprised the few former classmates he encountered. While rumors had spread around after his confrontation with Katsuki, the fact neither were willing to reveal what had happened after school that day had silenced those in their year. I wonder how they'd react if they saw us in the same class. Of course, that's assuming we are in the same class. When he finally found the door for Class 1A, a 5-meter monstrosity that made him wonder about what quirks had come through the class, he opened to find at least one burgeoning conflict amongst his new classmates. "Take your feet off that desk," Tenya shouted. The boy appeared to be as uptight and strict as he had the day of the entrance exam. Izuku followed the argument and sighed at the sight of Katsuki leaning back, his shoes resting on his desk. "Your actions are insulting not only to those who have come before us but also to the excellent craftsman who made that desk." Katsuki snorted. "Shut it, B-list. What fancy private school did you go to where they stuck that massive stick up your ass?" I went to Sumei Academy," the bespectacled boy said. "My name is Iida Tenya. I am not a B-lister." "Sumei," Katsuki said, ignoring the second outburst. His feet fell from their perch and he leaned forward, thoroughly amused. "Why am I tempted to stop their argument?" Izuku thought. He entered the room and started towards his seat. "Get out of my face, you stuck-up elitist. I suggest you not get in my way during exercises, B-list. You dare threaten a fellow student. You know that is grounds for expulsion, yes?" Katsuki snorted. His eyes drifted from Tenya and Izuku's side as they fell on him. "So you're here too, Deku?" Yeah, Kachan." Curious eyes watched them and Izuku felt his face turning pink. "I see you've met Iida. So you do remember me, Midoriya," Tenya said. "I did speak with you, especially after you destroyed the gimmick in our testing area. I tried looking for your score from the entrance exam, but I couldn't find anything that suggested you had taken it." Izuku flushed, and looked away, hoping he didn't appear guilty. Iida continued, not noticing his awkwardness. "Then I found out you were the one whose answers best matched All Might on the HRLT. I was quite surprised by that, especially since I vaguely remember rumors about that person being quirkless, but that must have been wrong." If it weren't for the door opening again, Izuku knew he would have been bombarded with questions, and there could have been a slight chance of Katsuki using his explosion quirk to draw attention away from him. Instead, the girl he saved during the exam entered and stopped at the threshold, flushed from the attention suddenly turning to her. "Oh, hello," Uraraka said, a hesitant smile on her face. If you aren't going to say anything, please sit down," a voice said from behind Uraraka. "They should have included your seating assignment with the documents you were given while picking up your uniform." Izuku peered around her and sighed at the form of Aizawa, on the floor, in a yellow sleeping bag. "If he hadn't confirmed it for me, I never would have believed that was a graduation present from Present Mike. That and the two were best friends. You were all in the hero course, not the general or support courses." He rose and the bag slid away. He wore his standard black shirt and pants with the carbon scarf hiding his goggles. The class watched as he entered the room. Izuku slipped away from the front and sat down next to a short boy whose hair was a line of purple balls. "You've wasted 3 seconds of class just staring at a girl. Not very logical, wasting time in such a manner. You'd be surprised what many villains can do with 3 seconds to act." "I thought I finally got away from his talk about logic and rationality," Izuku thought, keeping his face impassive. "As long as he doesn't single me out, I should be fine. I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shota. If any of you have heard of my pro-hero persona, keep it to yourself. You'll all know within the first week anyways, so no need to give it away. Pleased to meet you, assuming you're better than the class 1 was given last year." He reached into his sleeping bag and drew out a navy blue and white uniform with the letters U and A imprinted in blocky forms. "I hope you all packed your gym clothes. Change and head out to the grounds. I'll meet you there." Aizawa watched his new class awkwardly surround him on the track. Their profiles had been interesting, but he had been most surprised by Midoriya's score, before Nedzu had it deleted and added the boy to the list of those who entered on recommendations. "I knew he was strong, but 119. Last person to score over 100 was Best Jeanist several years ago," and Midoriya wasn't the only one to get a score like that this year. UA prides itself on its freestyle education system, he began, watching his students fidget. This system allows us teachers to instruct you on becoming heroes how we see fit and keeps us from being beholden to a set curriculum like your former schools. Instead of wasting our time with the entrance ceremony, I thought it best to go straight to a quirk test. Your files may include what your quirk is and how you did on the entrance exam, but I don't think it's enough. He smiled at the confused looks. You all remember the standard gym tests you took in middle school. You'll be doing them today, but with your quirks this time. The students grinned and a few bragged to each other about their quirks. The Department of Education continues to insist upon the prohibition of quirks when calculating averages for the 8 standard tests: softball throw, standing long jump, 50-meter dash, endurance running, grip strength, side-to-side steps, upper body strength, and the seated toe touch. I think it's irrational and doesn't help us at UA and the other heroic schools teach and train future heroes. It's one of those weird systems that have persisted since quirks began to emerge in a significant portion of the population. Bakugo, Aizawa asked, singling out the rowdy blonde Midoriya had fought on one of the boys' off days. How far could you throw in middle school? Katsuki clicked his tongue, almost sneering. 67 meters, sir. Aizawa nodded. Great, but don't call me sir. Stand in the circle. Once the blonde was in position, he tossed Katsuki the softball he had been holding. Throw this using your quirk. Do whatever you need, just remain inside the circle. Bakugo stretched and Aizawa added, give it all you've got. Hold back and I'll have you expelled. Excellent, Katsuki said with a vicious smile. You're easily the best teacher I've ever had. He cocked back and sent the softball rocketing, bolstered by his explosive quirk and his shout of, fuck off. A fiery tail trailed the ball as it created multiple shockwaves, distorting the clouds. His vernacular will prevent him from growing to his full potential as a hero in the eyes of the public, but it'll be a few years before he becomes a hero, and there are a few pros talented at cleaning up the images of the most rowdy students. The counter in Aizawa's hand beeped as the ball came to a stop far in the distance. He glanced at it and smiled. It's important to know your limits, or else you'll never be able to exceed them. He held the counter towards his students and they gasped at the number, 705.2 meters. That's the first rational step to figuring out what of heroes you'll be. That was amazing. Man, finally getting to use quirks is the best. The heroic course is the best. Aizawa snorted at the students' excitement. Don't get too excited. You're expected to become heroes after 3 years here, and it won't be all fun and games. Just so you know, whoever has the lowest score across all 8 tests will be considered hopeless and expelled. And as I told Bakugo, if you hold back at all, you'll be expelled. Whatever positivity the students had towards him burnt away in an instant. Your fates are in my hands. Aizawa shouted over their outrage. Consider this your welcome to UA High's heroic course. Izuku stood off to the side as the first 2 students, Yuga Aoyama and Mina Ishido, lined up for the 50-meter dash. Can Aizawa really expel one of us? I've always wondered why he had so much time to work with me. If he does expel students, that would explain a lot. Like the rest of his class, he had been caught off guard by Aizawa's announcement. When they had complained, he had spoken about the difficulties of being a hero, and when he uttered the famous phrase, plus ultra, he noticed everyone's fear and concern melt away into confidence and will. I shouldn't be surprised. He ended up doing a lot of the teaching that helped me reach where I am. That was an interesting quirk, Tenya said, standing near him. Although they were participating based on class number, there hadn't been any lining up like his middle school had expected. As such, they had all bunched up based, at least he thought, together by practical exam groups. You mean Aoyama's? We saw it during our exam, Izuku said. He frowned at the naval laser quirk user. Although he seemed nice, there was an obvious air of superiority. I can't tell if he's actually French, or just pretending. True, but still, that was a creative application. Before Izuku could respond, Tenya went up, joined by Asui Suyu. Mutant-type quirk, related to frogs. She'll have any easy time becoming a popular rescue hero with children. There appears to be a lot of potential in our class and not just based on quirks. He smiled when Tenya clocked in at 3.04 seconds. They grinned and Izuku commented, "Impressive, though it didn't look like you reached your top speed." 50 meters is too short for anything past third gear, Tenya grumbled, glancing at Aizawa. Their conversation fell to little more than small comments about other quirks until Izuku's turn. He walked up to the startling line and wasn't sure whether to sigh or grin as Katsuki lined up beside him. "Don't even think about beating me, Deku," Katsuki hissed. They crouched and rose into a sprinting form. On Aizawa's mark, Izuku drove the entirety of the quarter strength he could control into his right leg. The sprinting blocks cracked and he crossed the first 10 meters in a blink. He ignored Katsuki's ravenous shout of, "Deku," as he spread one for all evenly across his legs, hoping the concentration in his right leg didn't accidentally injure the limb. With each step, the ground gave way to his feet, and in 10 strides he passed the finish line and the recording device. 1.02 seconds, it said as he skidded to a stop, the ground fracturing as he dug in his heels. "I need more training in quick stops. Hero pay is docked whenever they cause too much collateral damage." Soon enough, Katsuki exploded past with a 4.13 seconds, trailing him. Izuku walked away, not wanting to catch Katsuki's enraged eyes. The last two, Minoru Mineta, the boy with purple balls, and Momo Yaoyorozu, finished their 50-meter dash. Aizawa led the class to the second test. Izuku noted Mineta followed behind Momo and purposefully stared at her. "It might be for the best if I don't befriend him." His green eyes then turned to Momo. "She's one of the other students accepted based on a recommendation this year. Toshinori didn't tell me about their quirks, so I guess I'll need to wait for now. She didn't show anything off other than strong athleticism." The grip test brought unwanted attention upon Izuku. He had watched as Minoru and Hantashiro crowed around the 6-armed Mezu Shoji. Hearing the other boys' results 540 kilograms, led him to tighten his grip around the device. It soon began smoking and a couple boys near him displayed shocked grins when he dropped his broken, sparking device. He ignored the curious stares and ducked his head when Shiro and Mineta walked away from Shoji and crowded him. The 6-armed boy nodded at him. "I might just have to ask a favor in exchange for getting them out of his hair." The third and fourth tests went well for Izuku. For the standing long jump, he was able to match Yuga's beam distance and Katsuki's explosive drive combined. Only Tsuyu, with the quirk she called frog form, leapt further. After that, a couple other boys joined him in conversation. Shiro asked a dozen questions about his quirk while Eijiro Kirishima complained about how much better Izuku's quirk was compared to his. That quickly turned into a conversation about the versatility of basic quirks and revealed that Kirishima idolized Crimson Riot. With the side-to-side stepping, he was forced to hold back his output when he begun to dig a trench that ended up being as deep as his hand. Denki Kaminari joined Shiro and Kirishima in joking with Izuku about the destruction he had caused. The class then returned to where they had started for the 5th test, softball throw. Uraraka shocked the class when her throw was given a distance of infinite. What type of quirk does she have to do something like that? Maybe a gravity quirk. She did touch her clothes and shoes before a few events. After Shoto Todoroki threw an ice-covered ball, reducing its friction, Izuku almost stepped out of turn. While he had been aware that Katsuki wouldn't be expected to throw again, he had forgotten about Toru Hagakure until he collided with the floating clothes that revealed where she was. He quickly turned into a red, flustered mess when she giggled at his mistake and then took her turn. Mineta rejoined the group of guys slowly forming around him, which seemed to have dragged Katsuki in. Rikido Sato had introduced himself during the brief walk between the 4th and 5th tests. "You're up, Midoriya," Aizawa called as Hagakure pouted, her uniform all they had to perceive her emotions. "At least one for all isn't like her quirk. I don't want to think about how things would have been if I couldn't turn my quirk off." He stepped into the circle, softball in hand. He raised both arms, channeling one for all throughout his body. Soon enough, Izuku retained the quirk's power in his torso and right arm and drew back, twisting. His body twisted back around and as his shoulders returned to being parallel with his hips, his right arm flicked forward like a catapult. Izuku nearly lost his footing as the softball flew from his hand. The class watched as Izuku's throw disappeared in a cloud-shattering blast. One cloud that had been in the way had a perfect circle in it. Izuku turned to Aizawa, who was watching the beeping counter. With each beep, he felt his face turn pinker and pinker until he was certain Ashido was shades lighter than him. 1.39 kilometers, Aizawa said, dispassionate. Oh, it went back to 1.38. You hit the campus fence, Midoriya. At least it didn't set off the defenses, the class whispered as Izuku rejoined them, shocked. That was the quarter of my present strength I can control, and Recovery Girl speculates I'll grow even stronger than my current potential. The rest of the tests went by in a whirlwind. The seated toe touch had gone poorly for Izuku compared to his other results, finding himself in the middle of the pack. Aizawa used his quirk on him during the upper body strength test, stating that replacing equipment required more paperwork than he wanted to handle on the first day. His identity as Eraserhead sent ripples through the class, for Aizawa was one of the largest street-level heroes that primarily fought small crime. The hazy look Uraraka, no, Ochako he decided, sent his way afterwards drove Izuku to distraction during the endurance test. Said test turned into a race between Tenya's engine quirk and Todoroki's half-cold half-hot quirk. It's more all cold no hot, Izuku reflected as they stood around, waiting on the results. The boy turned frosty when someone commented on his relationship to number 2 hero, Endeavor. The nervousness the original announcement of the person in last place being expelled washed over them anew. Time for the results, Aizawa said, bored. Lowest score gets expelled, so someone is going home. Your scores reflect your combined performance from each test. I won't waste time explaining how the results were decided, so here they are. Oh, and I lied. Nobody is going home. Aizawa grinned as the class was stunned. It was a deception to get your best performances. I have expelled a couple students after a quirk test, but they usually had attitude problems or failed to take my instructions seriously. A few of the simpler members of the class got into an argument with Momo after she let slip she had figured Aizawa had lied to them. Izuku watched with bated breath as the results came up. When he found Midoriya Izuku beside number 1, he grinned and accepted the congratulations with only a hint of embarrassment. Yet in that moment, a revelation hit him. I got first today. I probably got first on the entrance exam before they removed my results. I got first on the HRLT. Is this what All Might experiences every day? There's a weird pressure to being number 1. How will it be once we all become heroes? He paused, and then his wandering eyes spotted Toshinori standing behind a tree with a proud smile. This is what I want. I have to be number 1 if I'm going to become the symbol of peace. He turned away from his mentor and scanned his classmates. But I won't be alone. I have everyone here to help me on my road, and to help maintain the peace All Might and the other heroes fight every day to uphold. It was 2 days later when Class 1A was scheduled for their first basic hero training class. While many had complained about having to wait, Izuku found he didn't mind. They had gone through several more tests and sessions working on their quirks and revealing their current abilities and future potential. He found time to speak with everyone in his class, even if for a few moments. Kaminari introduced him to Kyoka Jiro, a quiet girl whose most notable feature was her quirk, earphone jack. Fumikage Tokiyami had surprised the class when he recited an old and classic American poem, The Raven, from memory, using his quirk to dramatize the poem. Present Mike, who would begin instructing them in English once the regular classes begun, had been so proud that their class ended 20 minutes early. Izuku discovered that Mashirao Ojiro practiced martial arts, which he was surprised to learn was only practiced by a minority of pro heroes due to how many relied upon their quirks. Even quiet Koji Kota had spoken a few words, even if it was only to see if his ability to speak with animals translated to Tokiyami's bird-like appearance. When the time for basic hero training arrived, the door was flung open and a tall figure in tights and cape entered the classroom. I have come through the door, like normal. Izuku grinned at his mentor's boisterous entrance. The class chattered, excited, as All Might strutted to the front of the room. He turned to them, grinning and standing in one of his best-known heroic poses. Basic hero training. This class will put you through scenarios many heroes face during their careers so we can forge each and every one of you into a great hero. Today I have a special treat. Battle training. The chattering grew more excited as All Might pressed a button. 4 lockers opened on the wall, each containing 5 numbered boxes. Battle training requires these, your costumes. They were created in accordance with the United Nations Quirk Registry Guidelines and the costume request forms you filled as part of your applications last November. Everyone stood as All Might finished. Once you have changed, we will meet at ground beta. Some of you may recognize it, for it was used for the entrance exam. As they all took their costume containers and left, All Might shouted one last comment. Remember that looking good is very important. Because as of today, you're all heroes. Chapter 7. Izuku was side by side with his classmates as they entered ground beta. After a few seconds, he recognized the cityscape as being the same location used for his testing site during the entrance exam. Like the rest, he was dressed in the costume he had designed for his UA application. Inspired by the scratchy drawing he produced after acquiring One for All, it remained as simple and utilitarian as the initial sketch. White gloves blended into reinforced gauntlets that ran up to his elbow, a piece of ceramic protecting the joint. His shoulders, upper arm, and torso flexed against green spandex shaded to match his hair. Emblazed on his chest was a thick white inverted chevron, going from his armpits to the point at the base of his sternum. A white utility belt with red accents was snug on his waist and the red color had been retained for the sneaker-looking base of his boots. Last were the black tights that blended into plastic-coated ceramic lower thigh and shin armor covering the steel-toed boots. His green hair rippled in the soft breeze that passed over the 20 teenagers. He had played with a hood with bunny ears resembling All Might's hair, but it felt childish and was too on the nail for him. Everyone's here. Great, All Might said with his thunderous vibrato. Welcome, my students, to battle training. If I may, before we begin, Tenya began. It appears that this is the same location used for the entrance exam. Will we be performing cityscape maneuvers again? The class nodded their agreement with the question, except for Mineta, who Izuku noticed was more concerned with ogling the girls. All except Jiro and Hagakure, but then again I don't know where Hagakure is, but that may be for the best. She's probably nude, unless there's a fabric that her quirk can influence. Nope. Today is the introduction to an important urban scenario you shall face, indoor anti-personnel combat. While famous villain battles typically take place outdoors, the worst ones are more often fought indoors. Between confinement, house arrests, and black market deals, you will find our hero-filled society forces the cleverest villains to lurk out of sight, and as they too often rely upon, out of mind. Thus, you will be divided into 4 groups of 5 to undertake a predetermined scenario. Each group will be different, so when you aren't in combat, please pay attention to the others. By the time you graduate, you will handle every type several times over. Wait, so no basic training? Suyu asked with a slight croak. Practical experience teaches the basics. All Might responded with raised fist. You may be required to write up analysis on your actions and determine what mistakes you made and how to prevent them from happening next time. Plus, you will be fighting each other instead of disposable robots. A flurry of questions was lobbed at All Might. Izuku only caught 2. Momo asking, what determines victory? And Tenya asking about division into the 4 groups. This is much better thought out than my previous exercises with All Might. Nedzu must have designed it, or maybe Aizawa. He'll insist on write-ups afterwards. I'll get to some of your questions later, but to answer the most pressing one, groups were randomized by a computer this morning, along with the assigned scenario. The groups are as follows. Group A is Ashido, Bakugo, Hiroshima, Midoriya, and Tokiyami. Group B is Hagakure, Jiro, Kota, Mineta, and Ojiro. Group C is Asui, Kaminari, Shoji, Todoroki, and Uraraka. Group D is Aoyama, Iida, Sato, Shiro, and Yaoyorozu. All Might coughed into his hand and Izuku frowned at the hints of blood. The pro-hero rubbed his hand against the bright red of his costume and continued on. Each group will report to the building with their group's letter on it and remain in your staging area until given further directions. We'll start with Group A in a half hour. Plus Ultra. Izuku tried to ignore the perplexing stare Katsuki had focused on the back of his head. While talking with Kirishima and Ashido distracted him from the blonde, his presence still itched for Izuku's attention. The 5 walked for several minutes until they reached a building with a bright A illuminating from all four sides. It was 10 stories tall with small windows and a metal entrance surrounded by stripped yellow and black banners. I suspect we enter there, Tokiyami said. The light is totally All Might's style, Ashido exclaimed. She grabbed the 4 boys and dragged them into the metal entrance. Once inside, a giant screen to their left activated. Welcome, Group A, All Might said through the monitor. Since the other groups have already reached their sites, I will begin with the instructions. You will be split into 2 teams, 2 heroes and 3 villains. Your tasks are simple. While the villains attempt to destroy the building, the heroes will stop them. The heroes will win when they defeat the villains, unless they either destroy 2/3 of the interior or collapse the building. Now, for the teams, Midoriya and Tokiyami will be the heroes. Ashido, Bakugo, Kirishima, there are 20 minutes until the exercise begins. Report to the pavilion on the 3rd floor for more instructions. Please refrain from getting a head start on destroying the building. All Might disappeared, replaced by a counter. 2000, it displayed, counting down with each second that passed. Come along, Broomhead, Raccoon Eyes, Katsuki said, entering the main building. They followed, complaining about the nicknames. That Bakugo, he'll be difficult, Tokiyami said once the door closed. 1915. Dark Shadow won't hold up well against the light his explosions produce. What exactly is your quirk, Tokiyami? Izuku asked. I've barely made any entries about my classmates, other than Kachan. I just hope what I write down won't create problems with the others. I've listened in on others talking about theirs and what we all saw during Aizawa's test, but yours is rather unknown. Tokiyami considered Izuku's question for a moment and then nodded. Please call me Fumikage, or the Raven if you want to use codenames like pro heroes. My quirk is Dark Shadow, a shadowy form that I have control over. The amount of darkness that surrounds me influences its size and the ease of control. The more darkness, the stronger I am, but the harder it is to control. Izuku nodded. Then you'll want to avoid Kachan, a Bakugo, he said, noticing Tokiyami's slight confusion over his usage of that childhood nickname. His explosions produce light and he could likely generate enough light to make your quirk useless. Kirishima should be easy to deal with for either of us. And Ashido, her acid quirk is dangerous. We'll have to either take her by surprise or overwhelm her with pure force. He looked at the counter. 17 minutes to go, would you be interested in discussing strategy? Tokiyami nodded and they dug into what they knew about the 3 deeper inside. When the counter finally ran out, they entered the main building. The chamber sealed behind them with a hissing press. And then the building shook with a ringing blast. Bakugo has already started, Fumikage said, looking up. I'll leave that fight to you. How long do you think All Might will give us to finish? I'd rather not think about, Izuku mumbled, rubbing his face. Ashido and Kirishima will likely be on the ground level or en route. Think you can handle them? They will shudder before my dark onslaught. Fumikage might be worse than Kachan, but at least he's on my side here. They split ways, Izuku using his quirk to leap up the open, central area while Fumikage descended towards where they suspected Kirishima and Ashido would end up. With each leap, Izuku grew more and more nervous. His fight with Katsuki a year ago had been in an open area with nothing that could be used as cover or destroyed to create rubble the other would need to avoid. Thus, he was nervous to see just how Katsuki would manipulate the environment to best use his explosive quirk, especially since his capacity using his quirk was intuitive and suggested he experimented either at home or in an area where his explosions would be hidden from notice. If it weren't for just how much of one for all I can safely use and control, Kachan would easily be the stronger of the 2 of us. With it, I can go toe-to-toe with him. If I can get the advantage, he should fall. All I have to do is follow the explosions and land the first blow. As Izuku landed on the 5th floor, his green eyes locked onto Katsuki's red ones. The 2 boys stared each other down for several heartbeats until Katsuki shouted, I've been waiting for you, Deku. I'm going to take you down as I should have last year, blast that bird out of the sky, and take down the building. It'll be useful knowledge if I ever end up in your shoes. I just have to stop you, Kachan. Izuku's arms rose into a combat stance and he waved Katsuki over like he would a curious child. The explosive quirk user charged, hands illuminated by a dozen tiny pulses as he prepared what would likely be a large and thunderous blast. He jumped, enlarging the pulses to soar over his opponent, and launch forward with a flaming right hook. A brief smile graced Izuku's face. "I've watched you fight for years, Kachan. You always start with a right hook, even against those you've fought more than once. This time, it'll serve me more than it's ever served you." Izuku ducked under the attack, leaning right, and threw a blistering uppercut into Katsuki's exposed ribs. There was a pop and Katsuki growled as he landed, a hand rubbing where he'd been hit. "Just for that, I'm sending you to recovery girl, Deku," he said. Malice rolled off him like sweat on a hot summer day. Katsuki charged once more, using greater explosions to increase his velocity. Izuku gritted his teeth as he met the charge head-on, grabbing his opponent's wrists beneath bulky bracers and twisting them so the explosions went upwards. He pulled them close together and threw his head forward. Once, twice, his forehead hit the bridge of Katsuki's nose. The first blow drew blood and the second one broke it. His third headbutt was countered by an identical attack, their foreheads colliding in a thunk that dulled his senses. Izuku shoved Katsuki back, making space so he could recover before the next volley of blows. Katsuki stepped forward before he could fully recover. Using his slight swaying, Izuku dropped onto a knee and threw his arms forward. He had timed it just right, grabbing onto Katsuki's costume and using his momentum to throw the other boy over his ducked head and slam him into the ground. Before Izuku could move into a finishing blow, gloved hands formed a bowl. "Oh," Izuku said before an explosion roared towards him. In the second before it would have burnt him, he dove left, rolling away from the flaming edges. Katsuki rose and pointed a bracer at Izuku, fingers wrapping around the chrome pin that he hadn't noticed during both the walk to Building A or during the quick flurry of blows that had defined their fight. "I wanted to wait until the chamber was fully filled, but I just have to finish you off now. Feel proud, Deku, to face the full power of my quirk." Katsuki pulled the pin and a roaring explosion lanced forward. Izuku watched the approaching flames. He suddenly remembered a televised fight between All Might and Endeavor for title of #1 hero. Following his memories, he brought his arms back and clapped. The shockwave cut through the explosion, caught Katsuki in its rolling waves, and slammed him into a thick pillar supporting the upper floors. In the aftermath, Izuku closed the distance between him and Katsuki in a blur, wrapping the provided capture tape around the explosive quirk user's wrists. The moment he finished, "Hero Team wins," came over the speakers in All Might's booming voice. "Report back to the starting area for grading." Masharao Ojiro glanced around a corner and frowned. He had been handed a difficult task, having to fight the other four in his group and retrieve a false nuclear weapon. "The worst part is the four I have to face could easily make a strong and dangerous team." The structure they had been assigned had walls teeming with bugs, according to one of Koji's comments. The stony-faced hero had mentioned it in coordination with his quirk. The others had bragged about theirs and he had listened. "Hagakuri's invisibility makes her very dangerous. Jiro's quirk forces me to be even quieter than I would typically have to be. And Mineta," he sighed, tail flicking out. "I never expected something so versatile from that little pervert. If I step on any of his balls or let them touch my tail, I'm done." He started down a long corridor, leading him deeper into the building. Everything was built out of this corridor and he expected an ambush at every corner. With each step, he approached the false villains and he knew their quirks and the environment would allow them to monitor his progress. What are they waiting for? Masharao wondered. Why not ambush me? All Might never mentioned a time limit and Group A finished in under 7. With each step, his narrowed eyes glanced from side to side. It wasn't until he heard voices that he stopped and ducked behind the nearest piece of cover. Mineta stepped out of a bathroom further down. He glanced in Masharao's direction, but after a few tense moments, turned away and entered a room on the left-hand side. The tailed hero sighed, relieved, and considered the approach to the door Mineta had entered. "This facility is large and many of the vents are big enough for me to fit into. It's terribly cliché, but then again All Might is the cheesiest hero ever. He'll love it." Masharao, however, didn't enjoy crawling through the vents. They were large enough that he could crawl, but their rectangular shape forced him to shimmy on his elbows and knees, chest rubbing the bottom and tail dragging along the top. There were a few moments where he expected to be attacked, but nothing happened. He kept moving until he found a vent over a high stack of crates. I can't believe you lost him, Jiro grumbled. You had ants following him the entire time, including when Mineta walked right past him. Hey, he wasn't that close, Mineta challenged, cutting off any response from Kota. Before they could continue their argument, Masharao smashed through the vent and landed on the crates. He looked down at them, and in his most dramatic voice, said, I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Tailman. A long moment passed as the others stared at him before Mineta burst into laughter. I'm going to hurt him the most. Masharao jumped down the stack, keeping the large bomb in the room's center between him and Jiro. She's the most dangerous at long ranges with those speakers attached to her costume. I'll need to avoid her attacks until I can get closer. Mineta ripped the purple balls on his head off and threw them along Tailman's path. He weaved through the onslaught until it suddenly stopped. In a moment of startling intuition, he ducked under Kota's thick fist. His tail whipped out, wrapped around the larger boy's legs, and tossed him at Mineta. The two slammed together and slid across the room. Neither moved to stand. Jiro might still be on the other side for now, but Hagakure is hiding from me. Where can she be? Invisible arms wrapping around his neck answered Masharao's question. Pink and teal gloves grabbed each other and put pressure onto his throat. Jiro came around the false weapon, her earlobes plugged into the speakers on her boots. Get out of the way, Hagakure, Jiro ordered. He'll be finished in a moment. After a moment, a voice came over the speakers for only two people to hear. Villain team wins. Mezu Shoji followed Tsuyu Asui and Denki Kaminari towards the hostage location. All Might had tasked them with rescuing fake hostages from Shoto Todoroki and Ochako Uraraka, the simulation's villains. The trio's plan was simple. Mezu and Denki would distract the villains while Tsuyu rescued and extracted the fake hostages. Achieving that would mean a victory for them. Hey Su, Denki called out as they stopped. Their group had been assigned to a barren mall and the hostage note sent to them at the beginning of the simulation led them to their current spot. What do you see inside? The frog quirk girl peeked inside and then quickly jumped away from the wide entrance. A beam of ice passed through where her head had been, hints of frost scattered along the corner. She had just looked around. Todoroki is guarding the entrance. Looks like Uraraka is in the back with the hostages floating on a platform. Denki frowned. Todoroki is dangerous. That quirk of his, I don't know if we have a counter. What about taking a different route? Mezu suggested. Tsuyu and Denki blinked and then the three of them stared at the empty storefront they stood in front of. You're what, the second strongest in the class? Denki asked. You could just break down the wall. He absently nodded, flexing his 6 arms. The webbing between them rippled from the motion and Mezu led them into the empty store next door. Instead of stopping partway through as the other two expected, he crossed the barren store and entered the back room. He stopped before a door to their right, which would lead into the store Uraraka and Todoroki were barricaded in. Tsuyu touched the door and nodded. It's not freezing. They must have assumed we wouldn't try and sneak around like this. Then let's go, Denki said. Tsuyu opened the door and they slipped through. They peered out from the back room to see that the platform with fake hostages was close by, floating. Uraraka sat on a counter before the platform while Todoroki paced halfway between the main entrance and the back room. Tsuyu's tongue shot out, wrapped around the first hostage, and pulled them in. Mezu bent over and took the stuffed mannequin from the long tongue. Twice more they repeated, Tsuyu's long tongue reaching out, grabbing a hostage, and placing it on Mezu's back. Once all 3 had been taken, Denki waved them away. I'll distract them while you get them to safety. Go. The last Mezu saw or heard of Denki Kaminari before All Might's victory announcement was a bright flash as the boy unleashed his electrical quirk. Momo Yaoyorozu nodded to herself as a pair of night vision goggles dropped from her stomach and into her hands. She had closely watched the 3 simulations preceding her group's simulation. Each one had been a test involving a variety of scenarios and challenges they were bound to face: hostage rescuing, decreasing collateral damage, and seizing dangerous weapons. When All Might had given her group a free-for-all spar, she had been initially disappointed. Then, he had told them the lights would be shut off and that a variety of hazards would be spread throughout the building, a two-story squared structure that seemed to be designed after refurbished warehouses used for entertainment. Maybe there is something to this simulation, she considered. By taking away our primary sense, he's challenging us to rely on our instincts and observational abilities. The goggles straps were tight, but once Momo slid them on, the world went from black to shades of green and gray. She started forward, a metal staff emerging from one hand, the other keeping it from making noise. Although the structure wasn't large, Momo wandered for several minutes until she encountered someone. Instead of a fight, she found Rikido Sato taped onto the wall, likely from an ambush given the lack of noise. Ciro's a greater danger than I thought. She continued on, tense, nervous, and excited. Shortly after passing Sato's unconscious form, she came upon a duel between Aoyama and Iida in the central room. Aoyama's laser illuminated the space, but was so brief that it made the fight easier for the faster hero. The beam fired 3 more times before Iida leveled his opponent with a quick cross. He then ran off, not bothering to look for onlookers. Speed is his greatest advantage and weakness. Even without light, he's still fixated upon it. As Momo left the main chamber, the fire alarms went off. A screeching alarm pierced the silence as a bright light flashed in time. The sprinklers activated and she pulled off the goggles. Metallic water covered everything and she spat out the little water that dribbled into her mouth. The pipes have rusted. However, the water harms me less than the other two. It'll make surfaces slick, weakening Ciro's tape and throwing off Iida's maneuvering. She came upon Ciro first. When Momo had heard humming, she had grown suspicious. While it could certainly be a trap, there was an off chance that she could catch whomever was humming unexpected. She found him in a small room, all but one entrance blocked with tape. He wasn't looking her way, so she crept in. As she raised her staff, he turned to face her with a face-splitting grin. "Hey Yaomomo," Ciro remarked as the staff made contact with his forehead. He collapsed, and when he tried to move away, she delivered a second blow to the side of his head. "Don't take it personal, Ciro," Momo said as she looked down at the unconscious boy. She turned at the sound of footsteps and moved away from the entrances as Iida slammed into one of blocked entrances. His attempts to free himself bound the tape tight to his shiny armor, glistening from the sprinklers. She brought the staff up under his neck, and said, "Yield, Iida." There was a pause as they stared at each other. Iida sighed and then said, "I yield. Now that everyone is finished, let's talk about the results." All Might said once his 20 students had all reassembled with him in Ground Beta's monitoring room. "We'll start with Group A. The star of that conflict was Tokiyami Fumikage. Anyone know why?" "I do, sir," Momo said, hand raised. All Might nodded and she continued. "Tokiyami contributed nearly as much to their plan as Midoriya did, but instead of taking down only one enemy, he defeated 2. While Midoriya's fight with Bakugo was the flashy and more difficult of the fights, Tokiyami engaged both Ishido and Kirishima, disabling them before Midoriya took down Bakugo while keeping damage to a minimum. As for the 3 villains, all of them were defeated, with only Bakugo presenting a serious threat to their counterpart. "Very good," All Might said. As expected from a recommendation student. He noticed Izuku's bummed look, even as he shared a small grin with Fumikage. It appears he was somewhat humbled by the exercise, even though he did defeat Bakugo. Humility will serve him well as he moves forward. He continued. Now for Group B. The star was clearly Jiro Kyoka. While Group B's villain team didn't put as much thought into their planning as either the heroes or villains of Group A, they did work well as a team. What factor convinced me to name Jiro as the top sport of her group? "She defeated me," Masharao Ojiro said, shoulders slumped. "I was caught off guard and she stopped me with a single attack." "Correct," All Might said. "There are times where you will outnumber your opponent. Being able to stop them can make a situation easier. Now, for Group C." Izuku raised his hand and All Might nodded in his direction. "Shoji Mezu." He led his team to the backroom door that allowed them to sneak in and rescue the hostages without tripping an alarm or having to fight either Uraraka or Todoroki. "Exactly what I was looking for." All Might grinned. Now for the last group. There was a brief moment as his students glanced at each other, wondering who would speak up. "Yaoyorozu." Although Tape Boy didn't do poorly, Katsuki said, arms crossed defiantly. Her quirk gave her an advantage few of the others had and was able to manipulate her encounter with Tapeboy to achieve victory. He was surprisingly competent, taking down Monkey Lips and his quirk being what Yaoyorozu needed to beat Speedy. All Might nodded as Siro, Sato, and Iida grumbled over the nicknames given to them. Strong analysis, Bakugo. Well, you're all dismissed for today. Farewell. And with that, All Might departed. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.